Schizophrenics of Reddit. What were the first signs of your break from reality, and how would you warn others for early detection? Story 1. First thing was hearing voices of people I knew calling my name when they couldn't possibly be there. Like, I would hear a family member or friend that lives 3 hours away by car. Then I started seeing objects, often while driving. Once on a lonely Nebraska night on Highway 2, a giant radio tower suddenly appeared in front of me in the road and then dissipated when I drove through it. I also see silhouettes of people occasionally. Worst visual I have gotten was a very real-looking man trying to break into my house during the day, and it freaked me the out. Happened twice. Edit. Also blood-curdling screaming. Edit 2 guys. I wanted to thank you for all the support and questions I have received in light of this post. I wish I could sit down and have an in-depth conversation with all of you, but I simply don't have the time to reply to every comment I get, sadly. I have answered a few questions posed to me, and I hope that helps you out. Story 2. As someone who has schizophrenia, reading all the comments on this thread made me feel about 5,000 times less alone than usual. That being said, for me, it was thinking that all my friends were plotting against me. So much so that I started digging as hard as I could to find as much dirt on everyone as possible. Auditory hallucinations followed that pretty quickly. At its worst, I began misremembering important life events, only to find out years later that what I felt I so vividly remembered to be true was actually not. But I guess that's psychosis for you. Meds, therapy, and a fiancé and friends who have your back all work wonders though. They don't judge me when things get rough. Story 3. This sounds like a joke, but it's my real advice. If the shadow people acknowledge you, maybe see a doctor. Otherwise, just get some sleep. Edit so like I have a million responses in my inbox, and it's making me anxious. I won't be responding to any of them directly. 1. If you're concerned, see a doctor. I went to my GP first, and he referred me to specialists. 2. The reason it's bad if they acknowledge you is because if you're just sleep-deprived or mentally wonky, the shadow people tend to disappear when you focus on them and don't appear to be up to any real funny business. 3. Shadow people. What are they? Humanoids of questionable origin and intent also made of shadows. 4. For the one guy who was offended. Why? I'm describing symptoms. Illy though. 5. Finally. No matter their cause, the shadow people can't hurt you. If they become overwhelming, I stand by my above advice and suggest trying to sleep it off. Story 4. Diagnosed schizoaffective bipolar here. Basically, I have both schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. It started when I was 5 years old. I would see dead people, feel the presence of ghosts, smell rust and metals, hear voices and thoughts of other people. As a teenager, I thought I was a psychic. As an adult, I started a job as a psychic medium. I legit thought I could predict the future. One day, I just decided I'm crazy and got a psych eval. Been on medication ever since and super grounded. My major triggers are fourth-wall breaking video games and TV shows. The Truman Show is also horrifying for me. Story 5. It started with not needing to sleep as much. Countless days of being awake, driving endlessly to pointless destinations, disregarding police authority. Story 6. First sign was, I can hear people from other side of the roads or in other rooms loud and clear. But instead of just whispering about their own conversation, I hear them talk about me, planning to do things to me. Any sounds at not a loud enough volume for me to hear clearly turns into a murder plot. Second sign was feeling of bugs crawling on me at all time. Of course, when I look, there is no bugs there, and the feelings go away. But this often keeps me up at night. I was convinced there was thousands of insects at all time on my skin. Third sign was the need to run away. I skip towns to towns because I have a bad feeling about it. Paranoia. Anger. Everyone is against me. Edit wow, this kind of blow up, so I thought I would add some additional information towards the drug. Trigger debate below. I thought it might help somebody in questing. Before schizophrenia, I was depressed, bulimic, and always had anxiety. I self-medicate a lot with drugs, and even had brief psychosis after prolonged meth usage. But drugs wasn't my trigger. In my 20s, I got married and then divorced, and the stress of it was what brings my adult onset to life. I have stopped using at that point. Schizophrenia is completely different with a drug-induced psychosis, and I know different people have different triggers, but if you think you might have some symptoms of schizophrenia, I suggest you stay far away from stress as much as possible, because that's what happened to me. Therapy helps a lot of people, but it didn't help me. I don't like to talk about it. I don't know if it was the great distrust I have in people, or whatever reasons. I just feel like I suffer twice when I talk about it. I used to be very open with people and therapists when it was just depression. But now I keep everything to myself because I just want to forget. I am terrified of drugs now because of what might happen, so I have not used any since my diagnosis, but I drink heavily and it helps me in a strange way, make me get through the day. I see a question ask if I can tell what is real and what is not, and the answer is no. I went through a period of time of being cyberbullied, doxxed, and stalked after my diagnosis, and from it I am now scared of cell phones, doorbells, mails, interactions in general. Any kind of social media interaction that is not anonymous like Reddit. But I still wonder if it was real or it was me. I genuinely have no idea. I believed it was real, but who knows? I don't. One of the saddest thing about being a schizo is how life-changing it is, and things changing is a trigger for most schizophrenic. It is a complete dark merry-go-round. I used to have a great job. I used to have people who love me. I used to travel the world. Everything that was good for me leave me or I ran away from it. When something positive comes to me, I thought I am here, but I am not the person supposed to be here and I get up. It spirals and you are so scared, but you can't help yourself. And yes, schizophrenia get worse. All the time. You thought you get used to it and then new shits show up. I have given up on meds because there is no true cure, just mere comfort. It just makes me binge eat, get fat, and then comes the worsened bulimia and body dysmorphia. Can't look at my own face anymore. The only things that helps is silence, laying in the dark, and try to forget. Story 7. I had a friend who started talking about a random new program he was working on Facebook. He was a cake decorator, so no one knew what he was talking about. Then he was randomly posting things like, F everyone. He had very angry posts, and then he would post a bunch of random numbers the next day. He kept saying he was working on the programs, and these were the numbers he found. After a few months of this, he disappeared on social media for a bit. Then he came back and said he had been diagnosed with schizophrenia and was in treatment for it now. He also apologized for telling everyone to F off. Edit sorry. I'm a bit vanilla-flavored and don't like to cuss, even online. LOL. I don't mind if you all do, though. Also, I've never had so many likes. Woo, I did lose close contact with him, but only because I live in another state. I did talk to him a few years back, and he said he was taking medication for schizophrenia. He said he had thought the FBI had him working on program using the radio. He said he had pages and pages of number written down. He is still a FB friend, though. He posts the most gorgeous cakes. He is a perfectionist. Story 8. Careful worrying too much about auditory or visual hallucinations, though. You can get both of these from something as simple as really bad sleep deprivation. I've been there. And while that's also pretty unhealthy, it's not as big of a concern as other issues. Also, just like your eyes try to find faces in images, I think sometimes you can hear your voice in random noise. Story 9. My mother, father, and college roommate all had schizophrenia. In the case of both of my mother and roommate, their first signs early on was hearing their name being called and no one was there. More voices came from my mother, and eventually visuals. My roommate started feeling things on her, then delusions, and every possible kind of hallucination. I don't know what the first signs were for my father, but earlier delusions were that he thought he was on a game show and that he was being watched by the CIA. This was a quick post, so I'll add more here for clarity. So, first, my roommate was feeling touches and insects on her. The feeling of insects is probably common. She would also see spiders flies. She had an unusually quick progression and would hallucinate demons, and sometimes flat-out dissociate and go into something like a bad acid trip involving demons. My mother is currently medicated, but still hears demons talking to her. She is highly religious now. She also, apparently, hears the voice of one of her previous miscarriages, which she says is comforting. During the day, she is very functional, but when she doesn't take medication, she gets bad, and her symptoms worsen at night. Voices tell her what to do, that is, don't drink wine. It used to be much worse with her. When I was a kid, she told me she was talking to Jesus and a baby in the guest room, and Jesus said I would live forever. She would bring food to the attic because she thought someone was living in it. Once I went into her bathroom and saw she had written in pencil all over the counters and walls, like in a movie. She told me she was moving to Brazil to find treasure. She told me my father would turn into a winged demon, fly around, and beat her. He probably did beat her. My father was mostly delusional, and he thought he was being watched by the government, or aliens, or anything. This was in common with my roommate, who thought she was being watched by governmentalian satellites and would cover the windows with foil. My dad doesn't speak much about his symptoms, but has told me he remembers traveling through time to watch my mother get abused as a child, with the help of aliens. A lot of you wondered how I am. I'm okay. One risk factor was that my parents were pretty big cokeheads for a while, but at least my mother's symptoms started before all of that. As mentioned, she was also abused as a kid, so this could have contributed. I'm currently getting my PhD in genetics. I try not to think too much about what motivates me to study this topic other than an interest and talent in the field. Story 10. One of my husband's good friends was never formally diagnosed, but we're almost certain he had some form of paranoid schizophrenia. He began to be very paranoid about anything when his symptoms first started. He believed a lot of conspiracy theories, like crazy ones about aliens invading and that a group of aliens from space were watching his every move. On one occasion, he and my husband had gone to a coffee shop together, and after about 45 minutes, the friend started to tense up and talked about how another man in the shop was a secret agent sent to spy on him. Instead of saying something like, "Nah, man, everything's fine, you're overreacting," my husband grabbed his friend's hand and said, "Man, that sounds terrifying. Let's get out of here and go to another shop instead where you'll feel more safe." I'd tear up a little bit just thinking about it. He was a completely normal guy until his symptoms started around age 23, with the exception of having some depression and probably being an alcoholic. He was an incredibly smart guy, but last year he killed himself. He had been largely abandoned by his friends for being too weird, and he didn't have much going for him when he had to move back home with his parents, but he'll always remember how kind and compassionate my husband was to him in those last months. His parents were also not very helpful and kind of brushed off his weird mannerisms, and so they didn't try to get him help. My first indication that he had become schizophrenic were his really cryptic Facebook posts that he'd make. They just seemed a little off. Nothing that would make you scream, "Oh my gosh, I think he's schizophrenic." They were just much different to things he'd normally post. Story 11. Not schizophrenic, but bipolar, which has led to psychosis. For me, it started with derealization and depersonalization and escalated from there. I wasn't real, and the world wasn't real, led to seeing spiders all over the walls and thinking that aliens were trying to kill me, and I had to kill them first. A friend was concerned and had the police do a welfare check, and I tried to stab the cop with a large knife because I thought he was an alien. That is scary. Once they got me into the hospital and got me some treatment, I did much better. I'm actually off all my meds now and doing pretty good as far as my delusions, but my life is also in a much better place. There is hope. Story 12. My boyfriend was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder. The first signs I believe were hearing or sensing beings in his room while he was going to sleep. The first ones I heard about as they happened was he would see something out of the corner of his eye. There is a baboon in the lab. But then when he would turn to look directly, he would realize it was a student. Later, there were a lot of obsessive behaviors, burning off freckles thinking they were cancerous, boiling a toothbrush to nothing if it fell on the counter, making me repeat reassuring words repeatedly for hours. I eventually broke up with him, which prompted his schizophrenic break. Hundreds and hundreds of pages of emails detailing how he was going to rape and kill me. He believed he was sent from God and me from the devil, and he had to destroy me. He left disgusting messages on my family's home phone about me, stalked me, and later found out he made a web page about me. Good news is years later he is doing well. Though he still suffers a lot and is not happy, he has a fantastic job, wife he adores, great house, etc. I heard the disease described, I think, by a schizophrenic on Reddit as you are on a plane to Hawaii, and then you crash land in Siberia. And you realize that is where you live now. Story 13. I made a throwaway because I really wanted to share this. I started smoking pot heavily when I was 16 or 17 and started to use magic mushrooms as well. Eventually, I thought that an angel named Satan, yes, the Satan visited me. I basically hallucinated him inside of my head and found him charismatic, charming, and awesome. I was having conversations with who I thought was Satan. Yes, again, the Satan. But I didn't think he was evil. I thought he was a pretty angel. I made my own Ouija board to try and communicate with Satan and other beings. I was told through the board that I was the world's chosen Messiah. I would just use my point finger and it would move on its own. I believed every bit of it and thought I was Satan's chosen Messiah and that the world was going to come to an end. I told a bunch of people this, and I even got a girlfriend while I was claiming to be Satan. Not joking. I thought I had superpowers related to energy and could heal diseases and perform miracles. When I eventually told my parents of my revelation, they called a local priest on me to basically talk to me and exorcise me. I cursed him in the name of Satan and he left, very scared. I eventually was taken to a mental hospital by my parents, and then I lied to all of the mental hospital people. I told them that I was just a normal guy and my parents were uptight Christians. Truth is, I was bat insane. I lied to everyone at the mental hospital and they let me out 3 days later. At this point, I made peace with my parents and I stopped sharing my delusional thoughts. Eventually, the delusions disappeared on their own. Some things I did under delusions. Stayed awake for days with amphetamines and played the Ouija board. The Ouija board said that I would win the lottery, no doubt. So I convinced my friend at the time to play lottery tickets with me. I remember how disappointed we were when all we won was like enough to buy a pack of cigarettes after playing all different types of lotto. I tried to summon demons using a ram's horn and tried to make creepy puppets. It weirded me out, so I threw the skull into the woods somewhere at a homeless camp. I convinced at least 3 other people of my delusions. I basically made my own delusional cult at the age of 19 or so. I won't reveal anything about them, obviously, but still. I then convinced a girl that I met online that I was the Messiah, and we had a horrible relationship for 1 year. Thought that muffins were communicating messages to me secretly because I was the Messiah. I laid on hands a mentally disabled guy at my workplace and thought I healed him of his sins. He thanked me. Had a sit-down talk with a member of a Catholic church, whom I was trying to deceive somehow. So yeah, if you're 16-17, stay away from psychedelic drugs. It might send your schizophrenia into high gear by 18-19 like it did for me. It feels good to get it off my chest. None of this is a joke. I've never told anyone this. My cousin started by hearing voices whispering at night in bed and seeing faces in the walls. Story 14. My heart hurts saying this. My mother often asks me to come to her room, and if I can hear what she hears, but it's all silent. It's hard to get diagnosis, and no one wants to label it. I'd say early symptoms would be hearing noises, nervous laughter out of context, and perhaps shouting back to voices that aren't around. Story 15. Disclaimer. It's hard to say if this was caused by schizophrenia or something else, as I was incorrectly diagnosed with something else and had a poor reaction to the meds, or more accurately, had a poor reaction to quitting the meds because I didn't like the side effects. Anyways, I became convinced that the universe was a Matrix-like simulation and that I was some kind of main character, if you will, and that I wouldn't face any negative consequences for my actions since I was destined to win. I stopped going to my job, but I didn't mention it to my fiancé. I'd just head out in the morning and go around for 8 hours. I'd had a fairly conservative upbringing and had only had with my fiancé, which I decided wasn't fair, so I set about trying to as many women as possible. I slept with about 5 women during this episode, and at the time felt zero remorse because, hey, I'm the star of the show, and since I want to do it, that makes it okay. In retrospect, it's probably good that my deluded self didn't decide killing people for fun or something was a good way to test out life without rules. I also sometimes think back to my behavior during that time and question things like self-identity or the idea of a set personality. In my normal state, I'm a somewhat quiet and unassuming guy, but deluded me was a charming, confident devil who took risks and always knew what to say to women. Kinda scary, honestly. This all took place over the course of just under a month. A couple of weeks to decide this was all a joke, and that following the rules was for suckers, then 2 weeks of not going to work and sleeping around. Obviously, my fiancé found out and left me, and my parents forced me to go back to the psychiatrist after that, thanks Dad. The warning signs were the pretty typical sudden shift in worldview and erratic behavior, but I was really going out of my way to hide it. But yeah, if your friend or family member goes from deeply religious to atheist seemingly overnight, or vice versa, and they undergo a drastic change in behavior, particularly if it's for the worse, that's bad news. The good news is that the proper meds, mindfulness, and having a fairly rigid and disciplined lifestyle allow me to lead a pretty normal life. So that's nice. Story 16. Not schizophrenic, but have gone through delusions and the like. If you ever get worked up over something, always check the facts behind it. Not opinions, just plain fact. No facts, don't even consider it. Story 17. Forgive me for putting my condescending pants on, but it appears to me from your comments that you are concerned about some of the symptoms you have been experiencing. If you are worried that you may be developing a mental disorder, please go talk to your regular doctor or a psychiatrist about what you are going through. As you say, chances are that what you have been feeling could be nothing, but worst case scenario, and you do have a mental disorder, early treatment has been shown to improve outcomes and delay could make things worse. Even just talking about things can sometimes help, and your doctor, a psychiatrist, or a psychologist are trained to handle these discussions. Reddit is, for the most part, a terrible place for medical advice and full of anecdotal evidence. Situational irony of this post aside, and seeking help from a trained and licensed professional is the best advice that I can give you. If this post was made out of pure curiosity, then please forgive my unsolicited lecture. Be well. Story 18. Sorry for the length, don't really think I could shorten this though. I was just about to turn 18 and doing a lot of psychedelics. I ended up finding MDMA, and mushrooms were a good mix and helped with my anxiety and depression. One time I ended up getting pure meth instead of MDMA. I did a lot of mushrooms along with it and had a really intense trip. At the end of this trip was a crippling depression. A couple weeks went by and I just went crazier and crazier. I think it was the depression, IDK what the meth mixed with shrooms did, but nothing made me happy anymore. I was too depressed to even kill myself, if that makes sense. I seemed to be fine before this, depressed and anxious and a young insomniac, but nothing seriously crazy or nearly this intense. Now, it's hard to tell when you're crazy, because it seems normal. Taking a cigarette and leaving it in a glass of water out in the sun to drink it as a tea and gain spiritual superpowers sounds crazy as. But after that trip, it was a walk in the park. I thought I was God and could change dimensions at will, and the scariest thing was I almost could. I would feel sensations that are very hard to describe. An example would be my thoughts would spiral up like a radio tower through my head and float above me. Or I felt a giant winged bug instead of lungs for a couple seconds. It sounds crazy, but I really physically felt sensations like this. I spiraled out of control and ended up in jail, and rehab didn't do anything else besides smoke weed and cigs for a year after that trip. I could write a trilogy on my experiences in jail, and the 3 court-ordered rehabs I ended up in. It was wild. Tons of abuse, physical, mental, and psychological. It was very confusing and really made my mind warp bad for a while. Eventually, after 6 months, I got to this point where I would be okay 90 of the time and then have a bad week. Eventually, I got home and then got diagnosed with bipolar, got antipsychotics, and that helped a bunch. Later on, and I'm officially diagnosed as bipolar and schizoaffective. I'm 23 now, haven't had a serious break of reality for a couple years now, thanks to an antipsychotic I take consistently. I have gone off it in the past and had episodes after some time. It seems like I had warning signs before that bad trip, but I'm sure my episodes wouldn't be as bad without that trip I had. I'm in no way discouraging proper and safe psychedelic use unless you have a family history of concerning mental health. They really did help me an immense amount before I had that experience. Now it's too risky. Edit okay, so there's one huge thing that I didn't do during that big episode. I didn't tell anyone what I was experiencing. I kept it to myself, and I think that's why everything spiraled so far out of control. I definitely was paranoid then, and that might be part of the reason, but kinda didn't want anybody to know and thought it would just blow over, like a hangover or something. It didn't, and it got worse. So if you're worried about your mental health, talk to someone you trust about it. Story 19. Not schizophrenic, but I have delusions. Paranoid ones I don't want to get into detail. But there are times where I am aware I'm having delusions. But I can't trust myself. It's a special kind of. Story 20. Unusual beliefs. I didn't have hallucinations, but I had delusions. I had to cover up my webcam on my laptop because I believed I was being spied on through it. That was probably the first sign. I then took the batteries out of my smoke detector because I believed my smoke detectors had hidden microphones in it listening to me. I became convinced I was tracked online. Soon I started getting hidden messages in music and videos. Like I thought music videos made by celebrities were about me and communicating to me messages. Like Bad Blood was a celebrity mad at me. A video by Katy Perry about birthdays made me think she was trying to tell me of an upcoming economic collapse. I believed they were hidden messages for my eyes only. Soon I believed people were out to get me, out to kill me. People walking in the same direction as me on the street were following me, and I was hospitalized multiple times. I wanted it to stop. I wanted to die. I drank bleach, doused myself in gasoline, SD. There was no talking me out of my delusions. I believed them 100 as if they were a religious belief. They weren't logical either. Even when I would admit that I couldn't prove what I believed, I still believed it and thought everyone else was wrong. For 3 years, I was delusional. I watched old game shows 12 hours a day because I only newly made commercials and videos had hidden messages for me. Finally, over this last summer, it cleared up. I could finally see clearly that I was delusional, and only then did I accept my diagnosis as schizophrenic. Story 21. Not myself, but my best friend. She got very paranoid. She was convinced her roommate was putting cameras up in the apartment. This was in 2005, so well before they were affordable. She said people were following her and taking her things. Knowing what we do now, these were red flags. Problem was, she was always kind of dippy, and the change in her behavior was so slight at first, I don't think there was any way we could have known. She had her first break about 5 months later. Story 22. Schizophrenia runs in my family, but I haven't been diagnosed, not that I go to the doctor, and the symptoms all stopped suddenly about half a year ago. But it started off with physical hallucinations. Small stuff like the feeling of spiders on me. But then it grew to feel like covered in spiders. Then the feeling of a rope around my neck choking me. I started hearing voices whispering gibberish in my ear. These were inconvenient, but didn't really mess with my life. But one morning I woke up because I heard a beep. The first thought in my head was, the aliens put a device to record me and spent about an hour looking for it before I realized I was being crazy. This happened a bit for a couple of years, then suddenly it stopped. Not sure why, but I'm glad. Story 23. Was going to make a throwaway account, but I shouldn't even have to. Many people can be predisposed for whatever reason towards schizophrenia, but never have it triggered. For me, a childhood and teenhood full of stress and dysfunction obviously built it up, and weed was the trigger. I started when I was 14. I liked it, but noticed a couple of times I caught freaky glimpses of things I knew couldn't be there. Thinking back, I also had a few experiences when I wasn't even high of bizarre things happening, like being in the middle of doing something and getting a weird sensation of parts of my body swinging big and small, or flashes of what I can only describe as texture, or one time being zoned out in class, half aware of what everyone was doing saying around me. Then suddenly I decided to focus on the lesson and everything around me repeated itself exactly as it had 5 minutes before. This wasn't déjà vu, not a feeling. I knew exactly what people were about to say and what was going to come up on the next PowerPoint slide before it did. It was weird, but thinking the teacher must just be going through her slides again, I asked my friend next to me, "Didn't we just go through all this?" And he gave me a weird look and said no. That was really freaky. I can't explain it to this day, although I guess I have this diagnosis. Anyway, as a kid, I always zoned out and found it hard to concentrate in class. When I was a small child, I also remember randomly hearing a sound as if someone had said, "May!" but kind of knowing it must have just been some brain glitch. I thought everyone must have it. Sometimes I'd shout out one of the sounds and pretend I hadn't just to trick people because I thought it was so normal. I remember the penultimate time I got high before hit the fan. I got a phone call from my dad telling me my younger sister had been taken to the doctor about a rash on her face and they found it to be impetigo. It wasn't serious at all, but I freaked out. I knew it wasn't serious, but that didn't matter. I was still worried about it, and it wouldn't go away for a good hour. The time I got high after that is when the aforementioned fan hitting happened. I made hash brownies with a friend. We took one each and went to the cinema. Quarter of the way through the film, everything suddenly changed. The universe, everything. There was a sudden sense of impending doom. I went to the toilet for a breather. It didn't help. I thought a fizzy drink will help. Sugar, fluid. I got a Sprite. I thought exercise. Just walk. I left the cinema and walked down the high street. I kept seeing people I knew everywhere. I remember not being able to tell if it was real or not. The panic hadn't relieved by the time I got to the other end of the high street. I thought coffee, caffeine. I got a shitty McDonald's coffee. I'd never bought one in my life before. I hate the stuff. I walked back up the high street with my Sprite in one hand, my coffee in the other, alternately sipping both of them in desperation, walking through crowds and crowds of faces I hadn't seen in years. I thought I'd just need time. I'd left my friend in the cinema, so I texted her saying I couldn't go back in. I'd meet her outside after it finished, and I sat for what felt like hours, silently freaking out in my head while the world crashed down around me. I think the sun started going down. Eventually, I got a text from her saying I wasn't there when she'd came out, and she'd gone home. I have no idea how that happened. So I went home and told myself, sleep. You just need to sleep it off and everything will be fine. I laid in bed freaking the out for hours, feeling like I was sinking into my mattress. At one point, I saw a flash of something I don't want to start talking about. I don't know if my eyes were open or closed, but I can only say that I felt like I'd seen a glimpse of itself, and even a glimpse was too much terror to comprehend. I tried sleeping that night, but I couldn't. I had a weird trance-like thing going on instead of sleep. I was aware of the whole thing, and I was just there in my head, watching thousands of strains of thought for what felt like eternity. I can't remember the specifics of the next day, but I was desperately hoping and telling myself that the high would wear off soon. But it didn't. It wasn't a high. I'd triggered a fully blown psychotic episode that lasted in total about a year. It went very much untreated because the services local to me are incompetent as. I spent months in a constant panic attack, extreme paranoia and delusions set in even though I knew they shouldn't be there. I thought people were coming to get me. I thought evil was trying to taint me through TV, radio, CDs, and my parents' CD cases. I ripped up art coursework I'd done because certain songs were playing on the radio whilst I did it and it was evil. I was afraid to look at my feet because they looked weird and I was scared I'd chop them off or something. The warm tap was evil and the cold good, so I had cold baths. Everything I had once loved was evil. I wasn't allowed to listen to my music or play my instruments. At one point, I thought I had to choose between my mom and my dad, because one was evil and the other was good. Everything became about the duality of good and evil, and everything was a test. Everything about me before this happened was evil. I started religiously carrying apples with me everywhere, because an apple a day keeps the doctor away, and I knew that something was very, very wrong. I just couldn't do anything about it. I was so panicked that I couldn't even keep my daily apple down. Everything I put in my mouth felt too weird, and everything I swallowed would come back up within half an hour because my stomach was constantly in knots. I lost about 2 stone in the first month or so. I couldn't be left alone for 1 second. I needed to be with someone 247. Every night I had to continuously sip water and count my breathing just to keep calm enough to pass out from exhaustion, wake up a few hours later in full "I'm going to die" panic mode, and repeat. It just didn't stop. It was relentless. It was so horrific. Several years later, I got a diagnosis of schizoaffective bipolar disorder. I don't know if I agree with it being as simple as that. I view my life in 2 parts now, before this event and after this event. Everything changed then, and I have never felt the same as before it happened. I was 16, now I'm 23. I definitely don't feel like I did when it first started, but I definitely don't feel like I did before. I've been in recovery pretty much ever since. It's caused so much trouble in my life and stopped me progressing in so many ways. My head just doesn't work the same way anymore, and I think I've had to grieve for what felt like the death of the person I used to be. Turned my post into a bit of a story and event, but sometimes it just needs to come out. I think there were signs, but no one picked up on anything. Story 24. My brother suffered from delusions. He never received a diagnosis of schizophrenia. He was extremely adverse to sharing his symptoms in therapy. Hindsight is 20/20, but I believe his initial onset was in his early 20s. He became extremely paranoid, very into conspiracy theory, isolated himself from his friends and family, had very erratic sleep patterns, and had some visual hallucinations involving lights and geometric patterns. He was living alone at the time, so I really can't say exactly how extensive everything was. It then progressed to much more elaborate delusions and erratic behavior as he got older. For what is worth, I know now that schizophrenia is progressive, and outcomes are best when a person receives treatment with the initial onset of symptoms. Story 25. Didn't happen to me, and didn't hear about it directly, but from my teacher. During his college years, there was one kid that was like genius-level intelligence. Up there with Albert Einstein common analogy I know, and better, he actually worked hard and didn't use his intelligence as an excuse from work. He made sure he would get his medical degree, never partying or slacking in any way, shape, or form. Then it's graduation week. He's aced the classes and everybody is finally free from the work, and school is basically over, so he decides to go talk with his professor. So they're chatting and such, and the guy keeps looking at something above the professor, but shrugs it off as looking at a light too long. Yeah, that thing. Several minutes pass, he's still seeing this green orb just floating above the professor's head, and finally decides to point it out. Prof turns, doesn't see anything, sees how seriously this kid thinks he's seeing something so bizarre, turns to Dr. Mode and starts asking a few routine questions, finds out kid has just had a schizophrenic break. Yeah, if you have schizophrenia, you can't be a doctor of any kind. Spent years working his off just for it to go down the drain when he's finally reached his goal. Life sucks sometimes, TLDR guys spent years not slacking of it all in college. Has a schizophrenic break during graduation week. Years of medical college down the drain. Edit to people thinking this was a psychosis break or something similar and temporary. He had recurring incidents and was tested. He was proven to have schizophrenia. Story 26. When my brother starts going off the rails, he laughs and laughs, like doubled over and laughing for ages, uncontrollably. At least he's having a good time. Story 27. My roommate got diagnosed while I was living with her. It started with her not feeling the need to sleep. She went 3 days with no sleep, and then she slipped into a purely manic state. Full-blown hallucinations, talking to herself, not eating. I would say this was the earliest sign, feeling no need to eat or sleep for her at least. Story 28. The first sign for me was seeing two of my best friend in her house when I came over. Not like in a friendly way, like this is a doppelganger and it will eat me kind of way. There were several times during the middle of the night I would get so freaked out by them, I'd call my parents. This was in elementary school to pick me up, and we lived a city away. During high school, I would start having trouble with sleep, oversleeping to the point of falling asleep in class and standing up in the halls, and not sleeping sometimes for days. Then I'd start to hear my name being called randomly, and it would make me jump at how sudden it was, and I started thinking something paranormal was stalking me, and I'd hear creaks and bumps and footsteps in the house, and the smell of dead things when no one was home. Senior year, I started detaching from my friends, and I got more irritated at things. A year after high school, I went into an episode where I thought that thing was in my house and really trying to hurt me this time, and I ran out of the house and through the streets, convinced that anyone that came into sight was there to get me. When that ended, I realized, hey, that's not normal. Something's off. But I still didn't do anything. Until about half a year into working at my job, I was getting burnt out fast because I kept thinking my clients could hear my thoughts and would follow me home after my shift ended. Moral of my story is, if you're in high school and you have a sudden change that feels like depression, but also is coupled with very fantastical thoughts and you catch it, that's when you need to go check it out. If you're in your 20s and you start hearing your name being called more frequently than the normal person might, you definitely need to get checked out, because that can escalate very quickly into hearing voices full on. Story 29. Started seeing faces in everything. Thought I had some special mission or purpose. When extremely sad, I would spend hours daydreaming of myself in some alternate world. Also experienced missing time. Story 30. I always find it interesting how narcissistic the delusions of schizophrenics are. Like they're the Messiah or the CIA or FBI is watching them or giving them codes and tasks to follow. Like somehow they're different or special. Brains are crazy powerful. Story 31. The first signs were grandiose beliefs in myself. Thinking I would be a revolutionary Steve Jobs type person. Thinking people on TV were giving me deep messages. Thinking the thoughts in my head were being broadcast to other people I looked at. To warn others, I would highly recommend not doing psychedelic drugs, including marijuana, if there is any mental illness history in your family. Story 32. I'm not schizophrenic, but I developed psychosis, which, from what I understand, is pretty much temporary schizophrenia. I started thinking I was going insane for no particular reason, just felt like I was kind of losing it for some reason. I constantly had the recurring feeling that my front teeth were loose and would fall out. I started randomly engaging in creative writing on Reddit, which I believed was much deeper and more profound than it was. I spent a lot of time fixating on these philosophical ideas that I thought were revolutionary, and I would walk around feeling like I was working on some profound puzzle in my head, but I don't think I was necessarily thinking of anything in particular, I just felt like I was. I checked my pupils constantly to see if one was dilated because I heard in a nursing class I took in high school that it's a sign of severe mental illness, which, as I said, I felt like I was developing. I started seeing lots of patterns in speech and text like I was extracting some deeper meaning from it. I started thinking I was becoming enlightened, and that I was a genius. I had random flashes of visual snow. Eventually, I suddenly had a hallucination after I wrote one of my crazy creative writing things. It's pretty shocking how quick it went from 0 to 100. One day, I was just unhinged. Then I posted a creative writing thing on Reddit, and suddenly I thought the government was targeting me because I posted something really profound. The next day, I thought people in my college class were talking about me when they were just having normal conversations. A few days later, I thought I was being mind-controlled and started having conversations with a voice in my head that I thought was a CIA operative who was interviewing me about the I posted on Reddit. It's pretty nefarious how much it can completely change your perception of reality. You can have thoughts like suspecting you're losing your mind while simultaneously engaging in crazy that seems completely sane to you. It can also really up your memory to the point that you can completely forget that you thought you were going crazy for months and just start believing you're being mind-controlled and talking to the CIA. Your delusions can convince you of one thing for a while, then you just disregard that completely and start believing something else that's equally or more crazy. Your state of mind and perception can be altered in profound ways comparable to LSD. All sorts of little coincidences or things that seem like coincidences can reinforce your delusions and make you believe they must be true. You can't just snap out of it, it becomes a part of your world and you're constantly looking for things that reinforce your delusions. And many of those things are only in your head. Hallucinations extend beyond just seeing and hearing things to actually feeling, tasting, or smelling things. At one point, the voices were punishing me, and it felt like I was on fire, like an actual full-body sensation of being burned that made me keel over. They also made me feel perpetually, unbearably uncomfortable unless I positioned myself in particular ways. Thoughts and images were inserted into my head. I had recurring images of being raped by my father inserted into my head that were accompanied by tactile hallucinations of being fellated along with sort of pseudo-visual hallucinations that I can't really describe. It was all very traumatizing. I still often question how sane I am because I know I wouldn't even notice it if I started losing my mind again. The strangest thing is how much it can seem like a voice in your head is a real thinking person. Early on, before they started torturing me, I even fell deeply in love with one of the voices. It's also like your emotions can be manipulated, so it's hard to say that those feelings of love weren't themselves a kind of hallucination or delusion. I still have images of being raped by my father and very mild tactile hallucinations that cause me to close my legs and cover my genitals. I also still have voices on occasion. It's been about 2 years now, so it could be schizophrenia, I guess, but my psychiatrist hasn't indicated that. Story 33. I just heard a study or something about this recently. I don't remember where, but people with schizophrenia are doing so much better with early intervention and new meds now, essentially leading normal or near-normal lives. It really did sound very promising. Story 34. My mom's first signs were complete and absolute breaks from reality. No escalation that I can remember. Maybe she was just extremely good at hiding her issues. One time when I was in high school in the late double O's, she thought it was the early 90s. She didn't know where her toddlers, my sister and I were, didn't know where she was in our family home of almost a decade, thought she was still married to my biological father. They divorced in '96 after years of my mother being abused by him. It was so sad she didn't know I was me. She wasn't dangerous or violent, just terrified and more confused than anyone else I've ever seen. Story 35. Posts like this always gets under my skin. I don't think I am schizophrenic, but I definitely suffer from heavy paranoia on a regular basis, which will explode sometimes. I have also had multiple experiences of being freaked out to the point that I believed enormous crowds of people were somehow out to get me. Story 36. Deja vu. I would get trapped in trying to break free from deja vu loops. As a kid, I was convinced my bed was a time machine because I kept reliving the same instances over and over again. Story 37. I never undressed fully in front of a mirror because I thought people would be able to see me. I wouldn't think certain things for fear that there would be someone who could read minds and find me. This is only a small part of it, but after watching The Truman Show, I literally ran out of the theater and believed this was a small crack from the outside world trying to send a message. I wasn't able to go back to my life normally and saw the machine of life in action. I would see the kids go to school and sit down for class, completely oblivious. Friend circles would form, and the emos would still get bullied. Teachers working and hall aides monitoring. As if my existence didn't matter, like when a possible world we live in could be nothing but a real Truman Show. I never felt more disconnected from reality than that time. I rewatched the movie a few times, but in the far back of my head I still believe in the chance of it being possible. Story 38. My brother became manic and was hospitalized for months. He had thoughts of him being on a special mission in the CIA, etc. He had a very lonely life, learning disabilities, and would talk to himself sometimes before this manic episode. At first, we were told he could be bipolar. Then they decided schizophrenic. Then schizoaffective. But the weird thing is, he tried 7 to 8 antipsychotics, and nothing worked. He turned into basically a zombie, but still had delusions. Now is off meds doing another medical treatment without the use of medications, which seems to have brought normalcy back to his life. Story 39. It was whenever, for the first time in my existence, ever since I had left the womb, my intelligence was successful. It broke through. It discovered and established what I sought out to discover and establish. When I was 1.5 years old, it was 1994, and my sisters were at school and my dad was at work, so it was just my mom and I. So she was screaming at me. She was screaming at me so loud, and I felt this presence of evil, and inside my chest it felt like it was going to explode, and I knew that I had to escape. I ran to the ugly square box television set that sat on the ground and looked at the blackness in the glass and thought to myself that I am going to smash my head through the TV set and kill myself and go to Vibration Land. Vibration Land was my favorite location in the house. It was the side entrance and was next to the garage, and even before I could walk, I would crawl there and lean my back against the door, and when my dad would return from work, I would feel the vibrations curse through my body, and I would feel segments of my body that were not localized to my physical body. It was an experience of existence that was otherworldly. It was so much more potent and vivid than the bullshit I was used to the rest of the day. So I knew that if I could smash my head hard enough against the glass that I would go to Vibration Land. It was realizing that this is not the correct planet for me. Because at that time, I still remembered clear as yesterday what it was like whenever I was in the womb. Whenever I felt my existence focused and drenched in the electric chemical perfection of the womb, and to have my very existence fueled by an external heartbeat that is primordial to myself. That is what Vibration Land reminded me of. And when I looked out at the sun outside and looked at the sky, I still sensed the same heartbeat, just on a larger and more sophisticated scale. I knew that if I smashed my head hard enough, that I would find a better heartbeat to be nourished and excited by. This physical universe that these other people belong to is not worthy of intelligent thought, I thought. How can they accept this as a valid reality? It was all a bunch of gunk then, and it is all just as much of gunk now. In junior high, I started hearing screams of all the suffering and starving people on the planet that are abandoned, and that I logically know them to exist. I told a psychiatrist about this, and when I got done explaining this all to him, he responded in a way that made it seem like he was trying to get rid of the screams in my head. I couldn't believe it. Why are you trying to get me to stop hearing these screams whenever it would be better to make everyone else hear the screams too? Because then humans could collectively work together to get rid of the screams. Because if the screams no longer exist, and I logically know that they do not exist, then I won't hear the screams anymore, and neither will you. And then this sunflower gremlin smugly retorts like, communism? With a half-soul baby boomer scoff, ugh. Not everything that involves harmony is communism, dum-dum. So I continued hearing those screams. I loved them for a while. Then I got my first girlfriend at 15. Was with her for 8 years, and in that time, I tried countless times to tell her about these voices, and she would never accept it as reality, and would the next day seemingly have no recollection of me even telling her it. When I would explain what I experienced, her mind went blank. When I was 21, the voices took a turn for the exponentially worse, and I was bedridden and would handcuff myself to bed because I would be too impulsive. If I would be near a knife, I would grab it and just start cutting myself. I would feel like all the oxygen was sucked out of the room, and it would be pumped in by this invisible electricity of sorts. I would feel this presence of all the people in the history of the universe to have ever existed, and whoever will exist are all watching me and laughing at me saying I am a worthless piece of autistic who deserves to get stabbed in the face and die, and that they are going to watch me stab myself in the face and die, because it is inevitable that I am going to stab myself in the face and die, because they want me to, because it would be funny but not funny enough to laugh, just funny enough to gorge themselves a little more. Fast forward to when I was 25. On June 11th, 2017, my mom told me I should just kill myself, and next thing I knew, I grabbed a steak knife and stabbed myself 7 times in the face and twice in the right hip. My dad, younger sister, she was 18, and my mom all witnessed it as it happened. My dad and sister were shocked and horrified. My mom was indifferent and said, "You aren't going to manipulate us, little boy," and went to the kitchen and made a new pot of coffee. I was crying like a baby on the floor, realizing what I had done. Blood was dripping on the floor, all over my hands. We didn't even realize until 2 minutes later that I stabbed myself in the hip. Because I didn't remember it, and they were too shocked to process it. Blood was dripping down my leg. I just barely missed a major artery and nerve. On the drive to the hospital, I started to feel all paranoid. What if I die? What if I am going into shock? Then I realized that if I was really at that type of critical point that I wouldn't be having neurotic thoughts like that, it would be a qualitatively different paranoia. And I felt good because I felt fear. For the first time in a long time, I felt fear. Genuine fear. And I felt like that was my body's way of saying never again. Here is an abridged version of a song I wrote about how I felt after that day. Soon, I am going to post the full 13-minute version and on a piano that isn't out of tune. The screams were gone. The forces telling me to stab myself in the face for 3 years straight. I stabbed Satan to death, and I continued to live on earth in paradise while he was relinquished back to his pot of primordial non-existence. Though Satan isn't all bad, I wrote a song about when I had breakfast with him. Jesus, Judas, and John the Baptist. It was the morning after the Last Supper, and they were all having a big, delicious proto-British breakfast, and then Judas and Jesus locked eyes and then started laughing hysterically. John the Baptist was unsettled, so he asked them what was so funny. And Jesus screamed at John, "It's an inside joke." But yeah, I always continued along on my journey to getting rid of the screams though. And a couple days ago, I released my first website, BabylonianJazz.com. I have an album of mine up on there called The Psychosis Sessions Part 1 that has music from this time. It includes Breakfast with Satan, track 4, I believe. I only started playing piano 3 years ago. Before then, I felt too worthless to put my hands on an instrument. Liszt and Jimi Hendrix played these instruments. Who the are you, little boy? I am hosting, performing, and live streaming charity concerts. I've got shows in Glasgow and Berlin coming up in early January. The money goes towards providing infrastructure, medical access, education, and financial opportunities for people who are neglected by the static systems of planet Earth. One of my employees is paralyzed from the waist down, but makes about $20 an hour with me. It also goes towards buying the equipment I need for my long-term invention. It has been a long journey, and I've still got a ways to go. I would have gotten there sooner if it weren't for my mind leaving my body for 10 years when I was 11. My goal has always been to transcend the concept of money. How can one do that? By inventing something that is priceless and then giving it to everyone for free. And now I'm on my way towards that goal, and the only thing stopping me from it is time, not inner demons. Not the projections of all the psychic suffering and hatred in the universe. Just time and patience. I love it. Here is a speech I gave about a part of this, and I perform a piano and saxophone duet of mine. Watch with subtitles. Story 40. I've been tearing up reading this. This post made me realize I'm a schizophrenic. I'm seeing a psychologist in 2 hours, and it's finally time to tell the truth of my condition. I'm 29 years old, and I've suffered for about 5 years. Thinking the TV was talking about me, cartoons laughing at me, thinking there were aliens in my backyard. I've also wandered the streets aimlessly alone at night with a voice telling me I needed to go to church, which is probably a classic. I have suffered enough, and tonight, I am seeking help. Thank you for not letting me feel alone. Story 41. Drug use. I don't really think I departed from reality. Instead, I just made my state unstable by constantly changing the chemical base upon it rests. This requires my system to do some really weird stuff to balance out. You could call it feeding or resting on old systems in culture and our collective psychology. I remember waking up one morning after a particularly intense night out with loads of MDMA and 2C-B and hearing voices approximately stemming from an orange object in the left side of my vision representing my family. Since then, I haven't really been able to connect with them properly. If you use drugs, try to really examine. Is the experience positive all the way through, or is it often characterized by discomfort or anxiety? If the latter is the case, should you really continue? I regret smoking weed in excess from a young age more than I regret using other drugs later. Story 42. Okay, hate to be this person, but not schizophrenic, just someone who suffered from various delusions throughout my life. From ages 11 until like 2 years ago, I just knew I was special and I could see ghosts. I would see them, talk to them. I had a crush on one once I was like 13, don't roast me. It wasn't terrifying, but close to the end, it got really bad. I was convinced an evil spirit named Beigeman lived in my apartment. He liked the closet and the bedroom. I would use really random things to verify my experience. One day after I showered, 3 numbers were on my shower mirror. I Googled the numbers, and it was the old area code where I live. Truthfully, it was probably random scribbles that looked like numbers to me. Another verification was one night my dog was violently growling at the bathroom for hours. I found out the next day my apartment had a mouse problem, but obviously it was actually Beigeman. Somehow I was able to snap myself out of this one. I still get freaked about it from time to time, but I just remind myself it's not real. Another time, I did a high dose of N-Bohm, which I believe to be LSD when I took it. I'm going to mention my child later on. Please note the last time I did acid or any other drug was 2 years before she was born, so don't jump on the trash mom train. Halfway through the relatively normal trip, my friend told me it was actually N-Bohm, so obviously my first reaction was to Google it. First result was how easy it is to overdose. Freaked me the out. Oh, that friend is in BTW. Whole reason he did that was so I'd quit smoking cigarettes. Didn't work. Anyways, I came down, fell asleep, but the after effects were so terrible for like 2 weeks. I went to stay with a family member in a different city during that time because I could not handle being home. I started hearing the 4 different corners of my brain arguing all the time. That's the only way I can describe it. I cried a lot, but thankfully it passed. Now for my worst episode of delusion, after my daughter was born. Everything was fine in the hospital, which was conveniently the only time I was asked about signs of PPD-PPA-PPP. I never wanted to hurt myself, my child, or anyone, but I was certain I had died during childbirth and I was living in the afterlife. I would look at my daughter and start sobbing because I just wanted to be her living mom so bad. My brain blocked out the day I gave birth, probably as a coping mechanism, but I thought I couldn't remember most of it because I died too harshly. When I'd passed the hospital, which was like a mile from my house on a street I frequent a lot, I'd cry because I just missed being alive so bad. While this was going on, my husband decided to start beating the out of me, and I still don't know why. Maybe I was in, and that was my punishment, but after a while I wasn't allowed to go outside anymore, or I'd risk being beaten. The delusions passed after about 6 months, and I was like, holy, my once loving husband is now physically hurting me. I can't have my child around this. So it took like 2 weeks to plan my escape, but then I was out. My mental cleared up significantly more once I was away from him. So I'm enjoying having a clear state of mind right now and praying it doesn't go away. I'd probably put myself in a psych hospital if it happened again, just to figure out WTF is wrong. Story 43. My husband struggled with mental illness since childhood, but his onset was around 1920 after we met. He started hearing things like the TV was on when it wasn't or a radio all of the time. He went downhill fast and started having delusions at work about his coworkers hating him. We argued constantly at home because it's almost impossible to understand someone's delusions when you don't know what to look for, and he thought I was out to get him too. He had been seeing a therapist and several psychiatrists since he was a young teenager. The meds for various mental illnesses were not working. He came to me one day with his phone in his hands and said he had found what was wrong. The web page detailed schizophrenia. I thought, no way you can still take care of yourself, but I just said, let's ask your doctor. Then he started seeing polar bears, lions, cheetahs, and other animals running around the neighborhood. He once stopped the car on the side of a major highway because he couldn't drive around the zombies. He woke me up screaming about giant spiders in our bed twice. He better be glad to this day I love him because those hallucinations nearly gave me a heart attack. He stopped being able to bathe because he thought he would drown. He stopped being able to brush his teeth because he thought the water would burn him like a chemical would. He started going catatonic. He couldn't move, but I could move him into positions that he would remain in, not on purpose. In my part, more like if I'd tried to help him by moving him. He came out of those episodes gasping or screaming. He could hear everything going on, but he couldn't move at all. His worst hallucinations are things I don't even want to detail. They feel like a betrayal even mentioning them because they have names. Names that even now with his medicines scare him. He started seeing skeleton hands reaching for him in the dark. Then, in the daylight. They were always there, and when they weren't, he could feel them just out of his vision. Then came the screamers and the moaners. They stood by the trees outside of our house with their overly wide mouths. They screamed when he tried to leave the house. They moaned when he closed the curtains and tried to ignore them. They were always there too. His life was literal for years. No medicines worked. He went in and out of the psychiatric hospital. I no longer knew who he was. Nothing about him resembled the person I met or the person I knew. I never, not even for a second, stopped loving him though. I held him while he cried for his dog at home and danced with him in the common room of the hospitals to help him forget he wasn't home and told him to remember the music while I wasn't with him until I was with him again. The staff would sneak us extra time because it was good for him. Then one day I walked into our bedroom and found him with a gun. I didn't even know his father had given him a gun for safety. He told the doctors he just wanted to shoot the ball of light in his head because if he shot it, the light would go off and he could live again. He almost shot himself right there. I had to fight him for it. I had to seriously wrestle it out of his hands while I was panicked and crying. Our teenager heard everything. I almost hit him in the mouth with the gun out of sheer anger that he would try to shoot himself. I didn't hit him. I held him until help arrived, but I'm not proud of that moment. I've never been so scared, even when he tried to overdose on benzos, and I made him puke manually by sticking my mascara pen down his throat while the ambulance arrived. Try not to judge that one harshly on my part. I didn't damage his throat, and I was doing the only thing I could think of to save him, and it did save him. That time he was just frightened by the screamers. Several hospitalizations later, he's on a heavy-duty last resort medicine. He had stopped getting online because of his paranoia. He has undifferentiated schizophrenia, so he experiences paranoia, delusions, and catatonia equally. We would talk to each other through social media a lot when we met while we were in the same room. Full conversations while we giggled about it like school children. I missed that. I missed a lot. Today, he got on his social media account to wish me a happy anniversary. I cried like a 2-year-old. He's coming back to himself, but he'll never be the same bright-eyed young man I met a decade ago. That's okay, though. I love him more now than I ever have. Story 44. My friend with schizoaffective says, if people who love you suddenly hate you out of the blue and try to convince you that suicide or homicide are appropriate responses to said hate. Story 45. I'll start hearing whispers. My own voice whispering and trying to get my attention. Usually this only happens when I'm off my meds for more than a day. If I don't get the help I need, I start having visual hallucinations of people I'm mad at or frustrated with. For instance, every person in my family looked and sounded like Donald Trump the week after Election Day. Even my girlfriend, while we were having ID with my eyes closed, opened them and she had a Trump head. I freaked out pretty bad and woke up in the hospital. My parents keep an unloaded revolver in my room so I can kill the voices if they get bad enough. I'll put it in my mouth, and usually 2 or 3 clicks will do it. Then I can get a few hours of rest after I change myself. There's often an involuntary release of fecal and urine into my pants. Story 46. A year ago in November, I endured what I believe was a drug-induced psychosis, more extreme than I had ever experienced before. This was my second experience with what I believe was psychosis. I was in Florida with my then SO. I was a regular weed smoker and drinker, but I had started smoking one of those THC oil pens. All of a sudden, I felt a euphoric sensation, like I was 20 feet tall and everything was vibrantly colorful. I felt like I was on what I could only describe as a psychedelic. I began to think that I could communicate with nature. The euphoria was mostly pleasant, and I enjoyed what I felt like was just a nice trip. As the day progressed, I was becoming increasingly convinced that I could read my SO's mind. I didn't tell them this, as I kept most of my psychosis in my head, thinking they could read my mind as well. I was also convinced that my SO was God. I was the Holy Spirit, and I was pregnant with the second coming of Jesus. The whole Holy Trinity thing. I'm completely manic at this point, pacing and talking way too fast. At one point in the day, I heard 3 ram horn bellows coming from the sky, much like the 3 trumpet sounds mentioned in the Bible that signaled Armageddon was coming. Flash forward to that evening, and this is where the scary happens. As night settles in, I decided to smoke some more with my SO outside in the back patio. Bad idea. All of a sudden, I become extremely paranoid and start thinking my SO's cell phone is a threat, that people are listening to me through it. I start becoming increasingly convinced that the world is about to end. I can't accurately describe the fear I felt. It was so surreal. I started warning the entire world through my SO's phone. He started a sound recording of me, I think because he was very concerned. But this made me even more paranoid. The fear was building up, and I was telling the entire world to come to the address I was at if they wanted to survive. At this point, I started hearing sounds and voices. At first, it was just a scream or two. Then I heard bombs and sirens, car crashes and mayhem. It was like the entire world was set ablaze in chaos and destruction. My SO took me inside as he saw my fear increasing, and strangely enough, I sat down at the piano. I began to play a song of hope that was for all the people supposedly coming to my address to be saved. Here's where things start to get hairy. As I'm playing, I become convinced that not only survivors are coming in the house, but also people trying to murder me. If I stopped playing the piano, I could feel them stabbing me like my nerves were shot. I began playing the piano like mad and banging on the keys until my SO told me to stop. My SO told me to come sit on the couch so we could watch a movie, not knowing what I was going through at all. I couldn't focus on the movie. I saw red dots appear on the wall that made me think that snipers were out to get me, like a SWAT team was outside. I hallucinate a man open the now closed back door and slowly make his way over to me, ready to attack. I started rubbing this glittery soap all over my skin, which made me imagine that it was blood from all the stab wounds. I was far gone at this point. All of a sudden, I knew I was batshit and told my SO to take me to a hospital immediately. On the car ride there, I was convinced that I had died and was in the afterlife of some sort. I still heard the piercing sound of bomb strikes as I entered the hospital. Long story short, I got the help I needed. I was diagnosed bipolar and have been on medication since. That has tremendously helped with psychosis, mania, and depression. Both my mother and father were schizophrenic. They have both since passed away. This thread reminded me of that dark time last year, and I thought this story would be appropriate to share here. Story 47. Not SZ, but I do have psychotic depression. I get constant voices, and I do have hallucinations. I do get trapped in them a lot. Sometimes I can't tell what's real or fake. It started when I was a child, but realized it in 9th grade, thanks to a close friend. I usually end up talking to my voices or hallucinations, even though no one else can see it. For good friends, I try to tell them about it, and they're usually understanding of it. Sometimes inanimate objects talk to me, and I talk to them as well. Story 48. I grew up being told my uncle had paranoid schizophrenia. Turns out he didn't. There really was a meth mafia. They really did kill people. They really did abduct children. There's so many stories I still don't know, but oh, how I want to. They show up every once in a while, usually when a family member changes address, just so he knows they know. The diagnosis was made by a court-appointed psychiatrist. The psychiatrist was paid, of course. All of this is true. It goes back generations. He simply married the wrong woman, tried to get out when he realized what was happening, took his kids with him, and then lost everything. All of it. He's doing good now. Strained, but relationships with his kids are there and have been for some time now. I am uncomfortable speaking of it myself after everything I've heard and feel stupid as for posting it, but I'm just saying. Could be reality masked by rich of drug dealers that buy over an entire county of authorities. Story 49. One important thing to note is that hallucinations and delusions are often considered the hallmark of schizophrenia, when in reality, they can occur with many different diseases. The core of schizophrenia is detachment from reality. That is the inability to distinguish the real from the not real. I've experienced hallucinations, delusions, and compulsions due to bipolar, definitely not schizophrenia. I'd say the moment I realized I had to get help was the command hallucinations. People often assume it's seeing things or hearing voices, and occasionally I had that, but the command hallucinations were different. It was like there was a presence or an outside force making me do things, making me want to hurt myself, and eating away at my chest so that there was a black hole inside it. It was even physically painful, similar to the pain I felt at times that I've had heart problems. I knew somewhere in my brain that this wasn't real, but it didn't matter because it just physically hurt so much. Early signs were my ridiculously exaggerated startle response, seeing things out of the corners of my eye, thinking I heard my name called, and a general sense of foreboding later paranoia, specifically at night. TLDR bipolar, but also experienced hallucinations, and they come in many forms. Story 50. Noises and not eating. Disassociating from reality and paying way too much attention to sensory input. Finding crazy importance in what would be a normal occurrence. Being manic and schizo is weird, man, but exciting. Story 51. Mania. Watch highs and lows, especially in one day. I had times of euphoria, and I thought it was normal for that to happen till I'd swing in the other direction. Watch for overthinking obsessively about certain things that may not be part of actual reality. Watch for visual or oral distortion. One visual distortion for me was people's faces blurring to where I couldn't even see detail anymore. Anxiety paranoia only heightened this. Keep a watch over your paranoia and its travels. Story 52. My high school best friend developed it around 17 and told me she first noticed something was wrong when we were together. One night we were eating at an empty McDonald's that had a solarium-style front. Apparently she saw a guy walking back and forth outside and thought it was weird I didn't comment on it, eventually noticing that he wasn't appearing through every pane of window. She didn't say anything at the time. Story 53. I thought I was a schizoid at one point. I would be sitting there coding by myself, air conditioner on, and swear I was hearing music all of the time when I wasn't playing any. I understood that the mind is a pattern recognition machine, and white noise tends to make the brain look for things it knows. I thought I was going nuts, hearing things. Turned out that my stereo system on a non-grounded outlet or a leaking neutral would pick up the local station. It happens. It's not like fillings picking up satellite transmissions. I really thought at some times I was hearing voices and music. It was the fall, when all of the computer servers were off, the AC was off. I started to nod asleep in the office, the speaker system was still on, but now I really heard it. I thought I was really insane. I asked others if they put their ears to the speakers if they could hear something. I approached it friendly-like, not paranoid, just joking if they could hear it too. All the time I was freaking out. Why would voices and music come into my head? It had to come from somewhere. I'm a coder, a musician, and can draw things also. I thought a lobe of my brain was starting to break and leak. I really needed someone else to hear this. They could. It was going on for the entire summer until a maintenance schedule happened to shut everything down. I really thought I was losing my mind before I started asking people. They listened because they thought I was going nuts or whatever. It's a coding environment, but they heard it too. It then became a mission to find out what station it was. I thought I was going insane, but sometimes the smallest things that are unexplained, yet once discovered, explain everything. Anyone who's ever built a crystal radio set understands how this could happen. Once anyone else said they could hear it, I felt so much better. Edit, check your neutral and grounding wires if you hear voices or music. Edit. Story 54. I'm not schizophrenic, but my mom is having delusions, and since people are talking a lot about mental illness on this post and have experience with it, I want to know how can I help my mom to perceive she's not okay. She started to think that everything is a game where people have to hurt others. Like, for example, one friend of our family is a rich guy who his wife recently broke up with him and basically took half of his money houses, etc. My mom somehow think that they are part of a game where his wife marry him only to stole his money, and in that game everyone needs to take advantage of someone. She think that you earn points to that game by doing random stuff, like making tattoos, joining college, move out of cities. She basically said I joined my English course to earn points to this game. Anyway, she is a sane person, she can think clearly apparently, but she has this delusion who only reveals itself from time to time. I can't convince her that she is delusioning and to go to therapy, and I want opinions on what should I do to help her. Story 55. If you start seeing meaning where there isn't really any, there's a fair chance you're in for a rough ride. You think the banging of the building site is Morse code? See a doctor. You think there's a coded language being used by people on TV to speak to you? See a doctor. You think people are talking to your inner voice and not reacting to the outer world? See a doctor. Story 56. Documenting here on my Reddit account because I think I might be losing my mind. I can feel bugs crawling on me from time to time. I'm house sitting for my parents and I sometimes hear voices or rustlings of the house like footsteps coming from around the house that's empty. I have a sword that I carry around the house when I think I hear something downstairs and need to go and investigate. I have ADHD, so maybe it's related to that, but there are times where I get into a weird disassociated state where I can't focus on anything. Like this morning I was programming and there was this very simple math problem and I just couldn't do it. Reminded me of a TED Talk I had where this woman had a stroke where the part of her brain that knew what numbers were shut off, so she had to figure out how to dial 911 using only the deductive part of her brain. These have been happening only in the past year or so, came with memory problems too. What's been happening to me for several years now is that I have psychotic episodes on waking up for a period of 10 seconds or so. This usually takes the shape of seeing a piece of furniture that looks like a monster and trying to attack it, seeing a camera or device sinking into the wall and trying to grab it before it disappears, or thinking my roommate or girlfriend is a threat and attacking them with a pillow. Sometimes I think they're a monster, and sometimes I think they're just out to get me. Sometimes I just have a racing thought where I'm convinced that someone I interacted with earlier that day was out to get me, trying to murder me in some conspiracy. One time I imagined it was little humanoid creatures, got up and ran all the way until the top of the stairs until I came to my senses. The most terrifying thing about these episodes, for the brief time they last, whenever I see a monster or a camera sucked into the wall, I have the thought I knew it. I knew I was right the entire time. I was wrong when I thought it was just an episode. This is a real thing. The proof is right here in front of me. My sentence structure has been off. It seems like a lot of the time I'm writing down sentences when I go back and read over my sentences that I start the sentence in one tense voice and end it in another, as if the first part of the sentence was on autopilot or I forgot it immediately after I started. One thing I've been dealing with recently is that whenever I misplace something, I presume someone else must be hidden my things because of some nefarious plot against me. Like, I could leave my pen on the right side of my desk, think it's on the left side of my desk, glance over and see it's not there. And my immediate thought is, my mom took my pen like she always does. She's always sneaking around my room, snooping through my stuff, trying to see what types of I watch and what my political beliefs are and if I'm gay or do drugs. Then I look over and see my pen where I left it and realize the thought I just had and how irrational it was. Story 57. Wanted to share this TED Talk for those who may not have seen it. It gave me an awareness of what people with schizophrenia experience. It's one of the most powerful TED Talks I've ever seen, and I routinely recommend it to people who don't have schizophrenia. Story 58. Thank you for posting this. I would have to say my dreams would bleed into my waking hours, and I would see people in my peripheral vision. Then whispers, usually saying my name among other things. Story 59. My ex-husband started to develop some symptoms of schizophrenia. Extreme uncontrollable mood swings, delusions, extreme paranoia, hallucinations. He already had a bit of a drinking problem, but it went out of control. He started doing minor drugs to try to escape. He heard voices, became suicidal. He refused to get help, despite my pleading. Eventually, he attacked me while I was holding our baby, so for our own safety, I left him. It actually turned out he had a brain tumor. While it was unusual for those symptoms to associated for the type he had, it wasn't unheard of, and once he had chemo and surgery, it all went away. Story 60. I'm bipolar, not schizophrenic, so I can't answer exactly, but I do have some insight. It's hard to say when I became bipolar, but I can identify clearly when I went from functional to not, which eventually led to a formal diagnosis. I thought something might be wrong with me in the year leading up to that point, but there was nothing specific or disruptive enough to Google or explain to a doctor. I withdrew socially and really isolated myself, and I also went from compulsive overachieving to a complete lack of motivation. I kept trying to get it together, but it felt like I was moving through paste until things finally blew apart. Unfortunately, I don't think there is a way to detect and treat bipolar or schizophrenia early, as disruptive symptoms are needed to make a diagnosis. I have both disorders in my family and knew I could be next. I started seeing a psychiatrist and a counselor in the year leading up to my break, so I was as supported as I could be, and it still hit me very hard and completely derailed my life. My advice for anyone out there would be to be kind to people who are struggling with these disorders and patient while they are being diagnosed and treated. Story 61. My dad thought he was the biblical King David and ushered our family into our car one night, where he would proceed to slash the tires with an Anduril Lord of the Rings replica sword and say he was taking us to New Babylon. That's when I was pretty sure my dad had inherited the family schizophrenia from his mom. He has seemed normal for about 15 years since that happened, though. Don't know if he is secretly taking medication or if he just maintains the mental fortitude to cope with schizophrenia. Story 62. Trying to get along with others can be its challenges, but it also makes us stronger in how we deal with every circumstance we face in our daily lives, trying to always work with one another and being very calm and collected and professional. Good accommodations work with you in the long run. Story 63. It occurred in a very rapid time frame within 2 to 3 weeks of some early signs and also later in life around 32. I thought I was being spied on by CIA, who knows really, and that a SWAT team and helicopter were descending on me. I thought it had something to do with a negative tweet I made about Trump. I got in my vehicle to try to escape and ended up crashing myself into a barrier. Thought I had sacrificed myself for my friends and told the cops to shoot me. Luckily, I was taken in and treated. Even though all their drug tests came back negative, they still believed it was drug-induced. Got the attention I needed and began my road to recovery. I was overstressed and sleeping odd hours. I also had a long string of days without a quiet break to myself, and I am an introvert. I lived alone and began following politics very intensely and found a website with free streaming of the newest season at the time of Homeland. Others would say I started to become very short in my responses, without empathy in one setting, and in another setting, I would overexpress emotions saying I loved them. Near the culmination, I struggled to think clearly and make sense in a conversation. Also called close family multiple times at an odd hour and rambled without coherent speech. If you or a friend can learn from any of this, I am happy to share. There are experts out there that know how to help. Hopefully you or a friend can get connected to help before it becomes extreme. Now I feel back to normal and have had only a minor bump in the recovery road. Story 64. As a normal functioning schizophrenic, the watch signs for me are losing touch with reality in your mind. And by then, you need discipline or meds or both to come back in my experience. Illogical thought and sights, imagination taking over your thoughts almost exclusively, excluding you from caring about others and even yourself. Basically becoming more and more lost in thought without connection to normal reality. This is really too late for early detection. For early warning signs, read vague or deliberately misleading and unreliable behavior. Showing signs of becoming totally self-interested coupled with incoherence to me is a corridor to schizophrenic relapse episode behavior. Story 65. I'm schizoaffective and high-functioning. Everyone thought I was just the eccentric workaholic. I was pretty lost in the hallucination and delusion and never really thought anything was wrong myself at the time. I thought I was going to be one of the witnesses found in the Book of Revelation. World's greatest mountain biker that one brought me a shoulder separation, thought everyone was plotting against me, saw a hidden meaning in everything that's not just a pencil on the table. Look at the angle of placement, the damaged erasure. This is a message. I was totally apocalyptic, would stay up for days writing code. Funny, everyone just thought I was just really eccentric, but could be the life of the party. The change came when the wife and kids came across some information, and in a lucid moment approached me about it. Changed my life. I can see it now, but unable to recall most of my life. I see the pictures on the wall and can't remember being there. Life is pretty good now. Story 66. I finally realized that something was truly wrong when the voices suddenly became hostile and violent towards me, leading to my first major episode. But at that point, I had already been hearing them for years and stopped questioning whether or not I should be hearing them at all. It started with just people calling my name. So always question that, I guess. Don't let people tell you it's normal. Story 67. I am on SSD, I for schizoaffective disorder. I was diagnosed before that with bipolar. Honestly, I don't know what my proper diagnosis should be, and treatment-wise, I am not sure how much difference it makes. Anywho, here goes. 1990s to 2000s. Looking back, my first signs were my fixation on the world coming to an end, as in the apocalypse. I could tell you all the reasons why the end was most definitely here. Sounds odd, but nothing over the top. I was always an atheist or strongly agnostic, though. I also would go through spells where there was a running commentary of my life. My mother would make comments in my head. My dad, a teacher, a friend. It was like they were all inside of me critiquing my every move. I would get so frustrated that I would scream out for them to shut up, and often that the critiques were very out of character for the voice attached to them. All internal dialogue, and they would argue amongst themselves on their critique. My job's performance was exceptional, and I even ran a small shop for a bit. Last several years, I would go through spells that were much worse than others. I would spend long periods pretty normal and think I fixed myself. Eventually, the end is nigh theme died off, but in its place was this irrational feeling of being persecuted. Everyone was out to get me. My phone was tapped, my computer hacked. If people whispered, it was to plot against me. And the running commentary was worse. My mother stepped in when I was homeless, living in my car, had months of unpaid bills, and still had thousands of dollars in the bank. I was on the run from the Watchers. A few years went by. I had held a job for over 2 years. Most of my jobs were lost within the temp period, so I felt like I had made the right life choices and found the right management system, cognitive behavior therapy, and meds. I lost my mother, was disowned by the rest of my family. I had few friends. My support system was gone. I started having problems at work. I thought everyone was out to get me over. I came in one day all stressed out, a rowdy classroom-sized internal dialogue, and was unable to think straight. I fired up my OD grinder to do a hot job that needed to be done before the government shut down. I hadn't been sleeping much and was fairly manic. In any case, I fired up the machine and the grinder's hydraulics were turned on. Everything started moving and a 25 part went flying by my head. I reported that I was being sabotaged to HR and they said they doubted that is what happened. I decided I was either right or wrong. If I was right, they were not doing anything about a dangerous situation that could have hurt me or others. If I was wrong, I was the danger to myself and others. I went back on SSDI and haven't worked since. It was a slow buildup of symptoms: insomnia, delusions, word salad, lack of personal care, internal voices not hallucinations, irrational beliefs that didn't fit my character. There was a lot of things that happened, but they all mostly fall into those categories. Story 68. I started hearing voices, mostly whispers. There is one voice that's always clear, and he has told me to harm myself and harm others in the past. I can normally keep it under control, just hearing voices and knowing that they aren't real. Then the voices got louder about 5 years after my diagnoses. They tell me how worthless I am and that people hate me. Ect. Present time, I have full audio and mild visuals. It only got worse over the past 2 years, but I've had a couple episodes where I black out. I also have multiple personality disorder. When those blackouts happen, the voice that's always been clear takes over. My advice is to see someone. I don't agree with meds, but talking helps so much. Story 69. I started experiencing paranoid delusions at work last summer. I became convinced that everyone at my job secretly hated me and was trying to find any possible excuse to get me fired. Anytime I would hear my coworkers talking just slightly out of earshot, I knew that they were forming plans to sabotage me. If I overheard a conversation about something completely unrelated, like measuring paint samples, I legitimately believed that they were still talking about me, just in a convoluted code language. I realized I was being crazy when I heard my supervisor ask someone if they'd seen the video, and I promptly spent the rest of the day searching through company files on my computer to try and find the secret folder where they hid the video that was clearly a compiled recording of all my wrongdoing since I'd started working there. I ended up leaving the company because of this imagined persecution, but shortly afterwards got into treatment. We eventually figured out that this temporary insanity was thankfully not a result of schizophrenia, but rather severe social anxiety. Was still absolutely wild to experience. Story 70. I thought I was an alien hybrid for about 3 months. It progressively got worse and worse until I broke down because I thought I was a hollow shell unless I died. Kept it bottled up for the most part until I had another episode and told my therapist that I thought it annoying. She basically went, "Oh no wonder you're like this." I didn't tell her I had delusions because she asked if I heard voices, not if I thought I was super crazy special. I'm currently unmedicated, but I've got a really good support net and can cope decently with what I've got. Story 71. A very close friend of mine's mother is schizophrenic. When we were young, maybe 10, she accused their father of molestation. He had her committed. But at 14, on a camping trip, I realized she was telling the truth. When your friends or loved ones say what you think are just crazy things, actually listen. Make sure there couldn't be any truth to them. Story 72. Bipolar 1. For me, it started with seeing bugs all over my apartment that weren't really there. I only realized this because my roommate walked into the kitchen as I was trying to hit one in the middle of the counter and asked what I was doing. My signal to myself that I really need to proceed with caution is if other people don't see the things I'm seeing and they seem like things I don't normally see, they're probably hallucinations, and I need to talk to my psychiatrist. Also, a pagan, but I generally believe that magic witchcraft is similar to a combination of herbal medicine and mediation, i.e., not supernatural. Whenever I start to find believing I have supernatural powers and I can use witchcraft to supernaturally influence events, I know I am probably on the edge of some kind of break. This one often comes right before I start seeing shadow people everywhere. I literally have it written down that if I'm one consistently having trouble killing bugs in my apartment or two, believe I can supernaturally influence events, I have to tell my therapist so we can assess together whether it's real or not. Story 73. I was walking down a street with my mother at night when I was 11 years old and saw a dark figure that looked like a child riding a bike, and I said to my mom, "It's so dark out. Who would let their kid ride a bike this late at night?" And she definitely had no idea what I was talking about. She realized very quickly what was happening, because my father also has schizophrenia, and she explained what it was. Honestly, I was let down because I thought I was seeing ghosts, and ghosts are much cooler than a mental illness. Story 74 psychiatrist here. I won't tell any specifics of any cases, but the first sign, what people overlook, is called a prodromal period, that is the period before typical symptoms of voices, etc. develop. In this phase, people become withdrawn, have vague, broad, poorly defined paranoia, have very little motivation. If you get this way for a prolonged period, see a doctor. Might be depression, might be something worse. Story 75. My only problem is that I don't consider it an illness. I'm still functional and have learned more or less to tap into it. I find it fascinating. Can be a trip for sure, and during some very intense episodes, life can fall apart. But at that time, so was everything else. Stress activated it for me, and took time, and I'm calmer and okay now. Story 76. My mother is diagnosed with schizophrenia and rapid cycling bipolar disorder, and I grew up with her doing really crazy and scary things, like pushing us away whenever we would try to hug her as young children because we weren't her children. As she would push us, she'd yell, "Get away from me, you're alien pods. What have you done with my children?" My dad let us live with her alone instead of getting custody of us. It was very frightening as a 7-year-old who was more sound of mind and responsible than my mother. Since I grew up with all of this craziness, I thankfully recognized that all of my delusions were just that, and they didn't really bother me all that much whenever they started happening to me. I believe that the main culprit for the onset of my delusions was that I was raised in a doomsday cult, Jehovah's Witnesses. From infancy, they force you to study their publications at least 3 days a week, right along with the adults' no Sunday school or happy little activities for JW kids. These publications are nightmare-inducing. They mainly focus on Armageddon and teach that all non-JWs, even your little schoolmates or JWs who aren't perfect, are going to perish violently at the Great Tribulation. The pages depict grotesque images of people suffering and dying in terrible ways and fire raining down from the heavens. The talks from the platform never focus on positive things like loving your neighbors or Bible stories about the kind acts of Jesus, but rather concentrate on how one could always be doing more for the organization, making you feel worthless, and reminding you that if you're not perfect, that you will suffer a hideous demise at Armageddon. Imagine being subject to this imagery several times a week throughout your formative years. It can really do some damage that lasts well into adulthood. I had stopped going to the Kingdom Hall for years, but was still heavily indoctrinated throughout my early adulthood. I constantly dwelled on death at Armageddon and my sins. I'm awake now and realize that I was raised in a cult. I would have many paranoid delusions but recognize them as being unrealistic. However, I never sought professional help. I would always talk myself back into reality. Whenever I was alone, I would very regularly experience auditory hallucinations that consisted of fully orchestrated musical pieces that sounded absolutely amazing. I would allow myself to experience those delusions, even though I probably shouldn't have. I came up with some pretty groovy bass riffs in the process, and I honestly miss them. Since I've woken up and realized that I was in a cult, I haven't been paranoid, anxious, nor have I experienced any auditory hallucinations. As a side note, if you are or were a member of Jehovah's Witnesses and are looking for support or just somewhere to vent, we'd love to offer a listening ear at Rex. You're not alone. Story 77 is schizoaffective. Others posting about schizophrenia, but aren't schizophrenic themselves. They get some of it horribly wrong. Crawls back to bed. Story 78. Isn't crazy how so many schizophrenics all think similar things. CIA agents, aliens, etc. My ex is schizo, and all of the things I've read on here I've heard all about. When I truly started being paranoid, people were following me. The delusions, or visions, or hallucinations, they never mattered. When I thought people might intrude on my life, it did scare me. Story 79. By age 10, I was an insomniac. I fully believed I had magic powers and was friends with wind gods. Not in the way that the average child has fantasies, more like strong beliefs that lasted for years at a time. By 13, I believed I was special, a chosen one, who could harness powers from the gods. I knew these things were dangerous to talk about because I had read enough books to know I would be called crazy, become an outcast. However, in my mind, they would only think I was crazy. I was finally diagnosed and began medications in my early 20s after many incidents and breakdowns at work. I have since not been able to hold a job for very long at a time and am unable to support myself. I am in my mid-30s now and diagnosed with bipolar disorder as well. Story 80. It's not a break from reality. It's a break to a different reality, based on a more variable level of tested or assumed truth. Let's guess as a fantasy exercise that I walk down the street. I see a bunch of noobs wearing shirts of labels and colors. I ignore them, don't give them a second though. I don't consider what they are doing, which hands are in which positions, what side of the street they are on, what they are near, their gender, age, or assumed origin. And I don't reference any of that or those observed events against any others in the past or predicted in the future. I just glance up, see peeps, carry no thought, and move on relaxing. Now let's guess, again as a fantasy exercise, that I spent decades making predictions and assumptions in a professional role in typical small business. Given tiny bits of real info, I solve problems that others can't. The myelinated brain cells that take random bits of info and turn them into possibilities to investigate in a way that is fast and ultra-powerful. This is because I've worked those brain cells out for decades. Consider that feature of gathering info, assessing, rationalizing, testing, then storing the results success when as at the Arnold Schwarzenegger level. Then consider me against someone who daydreams but didn't have such a job over decades. But they myelinate the same pathways. Me or the daydreamer walk down the street. We see a bunch of noobs wearing shirts of labels and colors. But we don't ignore them. We are curious. Our eyes and ears and other senses scan every feature, and we render those down to a simple set that stands out based on past experiences. This set is applied to past knowledge and events, and future predicted events. We let our imagination run wild on the sets. In fractions of a second, whole new realities exist, where that precise moment and those people are all categorized in fantasies or as problems to be solved. The issue is that it's all in our heads and we forget Occam's razor. Being awesomely capable and accustomed at doing so, we can hold as real any number of possibilities just as we make the assumption that masters aren't an analogy for lightsabers, but this might be real or might be a coincident possibility depending on a certain date. So to do we hold real the fact that our kids love to play with lightsabers, even though the cheap plastic toy breaks easily and is bad for the planet due to the waste. If you ask someone who is struggling, is it real? They probably say yes. Outcome of this conversation variable. If you ask them, can you tell me how real this is in a percentage from 0 to 100? And ask also, is the word real valid here? Or is it just a possibility that is dynamic over time and variable in location? Then who knows what your response may be? It'll leave you with a final thought. Is global warming a delusion based on schizophrenia? After all, is it something real that you personally know? I'm guessing that many read Science News, science reports, or a few select physical visits to e.g. a glacier they went to as a child and have photos of. But have you personally inspected all assumed 100,000 global temp sensors data sources at all times? Answer is no. It's impossible. Therefore, I'd say, anyone who believes in or argues against global warming is using the same brain cells as those used by someone who is delusional, just in a different way. Evidence, selection, assumption, prediction, and action, based on this or paralyzing inaction. It would be interesting to hear from others strong at this who are well, that have techniques that enable them to turn guesses and assumptions into solutions without descending into delusions that are less or not at all likely. Story 81. I'm not a sufferer myself, but I just want to say my love goes out to all of you who are. 3 members of my close family are schizophrenic, 2 times brothers and 1 times auntie. One brother in particular has a severe case. It's so bad he can barely communicate now. Large delays in him answering questions if he even does, and even then, there is no flow, and it's really hard to share thoughts back and forward with him. It's sad because he used to be so smart and excitable. Now he's slow, docile, and distracted, his eyes staring at things that are not there. The drugs over 15 years have mostly stopped him physically acting out on extreme-level psychosis, but it still remains at large inside his head and contributes to odd and paranoid behavior. At least the complete meltdowns that end with him naked in a padded room talking to Jesus are less frequent now. I think those here who can articulate their own conditions so clearly are doing well. To hear some of you are even married or have a job warms my heart and gives me hope for my bro. I figured out something was wrong when he was about 17 after he dropped out of school due to depression. That was a shock in itself, but then he started doing really strange things. He had a profound mistrust for me all of a sudden. He would come knocking on my flat door asking for weed or acid. I'd say, "Sorry, man, I don't have any of that." He would gaze almost murderously into my eye and say, "Why are you lying to me?" He got obsessed with things. He even had an imaginary psychic relationship with a girl from school who probably didn't even know his name. He ended up going to her house and demanding an explanation why she won't come out with him, as she loved him back apparently. No surprise she got freaked and called the police. I could discuss some really disturbing things, but I'm wary of painting a bad picture and adding to the stigma. I believe my brother is an extreme case of an already terrible disease, and I can tell by the writings here that many people with schizophrenia are far more functional. Like any mental disorder, there is a huge spectrum. I feel for you guys. I can't even imagine how tough it must be with this lifelong struggle. I keep having to remind myself of what it might feel like for my bro whenever I'm frustrated or impatient with him. Sometimes it makes me cry when I try to conceptualize the inner demons he's dealing with. The hallucinatory power must be immense to make him act in the ways he has. As lucky he has a loving set of parents, and am deeply saddened when I think of those out on the street who have no guardian angels looking out for them. Story 82. My roommate in college was. We were paired together because I had clinical depression at the time. Interesting policy. It didn't impact my life beyond a few things. She always thought I had moved her stuff when I hadn't touched it. She had always left it at school books. She would constantly ask if anyone had sat or slept on her bed. She wouldn't be mad, she'd say. She just needed me to be honest. Again, no one touched it. A couple times, she called me from a far away, expensive to get to in our city destination. She thought there were men following her with earpieces in the park. She couldn't get in a taxi because the taxi driver was in on it. She couldn't ask for help on the street because she didn't know who to trust. Anyone could be in on it. Finally, her laptop was stolen out of her bag while she wore it on the subway. Another big thing. Accusations, etc. She couldn't pinpoint the last time she had it or when, etc. Finally tracked it down to just not paying attention. Very dramatic year for sure. I was on Seroquel, so not much was bothering me. Story 83. One of my best mates developed schizophrenia around the time he started drinking and smoking weed. He started out telling me about sounds and bumping in his house and told me it spooked him a bit. Then it went to seeing shadows and silhouettes inside and blamed it on possible ghosts, which not long after turned into full-blown ghosts jumping out at him and standing in the corner, and he's pretty straight nowadays. Story 84. My mom had schizophrenia. I don't know exactly how she was diagnosed, but I know growing up she would tell me things like Jim Morrison was my grandfather and she was marrying Keith Richards. She would also constantly be talking and laughing. It would take several attempts to bring her back to this reality. I think a lot of people realize something isn't right when they develop a lot of paranoia about people. They are sure other people are out to get them. That would happen when my mom would go off her medication. Story 85. A relative of mine displays so many symptoms of schizophrenia, thinking people are always talking and plotting against him, hearing things like "we are watching what you do at night." He's unable to keep things in memory, and he feels as if his mind has been locked. For some reason, he's more religious now, but I think it's from familial pressure. Apparently, his family has taken him to psychologists, but I don't trust them because they're uneducated. My family is in a cult, Jehovah's Witnesses, and thinks he's demon-possessed, and apparently a Bible study that would make him come into the cult will save him. Thing is, it suddenly happened. He used to be a very active guy, compete in inter-college hockey championship and win trophies. All the girls were after him, very social and nice dude. Their family also thinks a curse has been put upon him by someone. Has a relative, but we don't really keep in touch with them. And I've tried, but I'm too young according to them. I can't convince my family nor theirs to stop believing in this BS and get him to go to an actual doctor. I cried the night I heard him tell all that stuff to our family. He's suffering so much, and I possibly know how to help him, but I can't. Don't know what to do. Story 86. For me, it started out with the delusion that my brother's dog was some kind of shapeshifter plotting against me. Like I for real thought this dog was plotting my downfall. It even went so far that I convinced my mom to get rid of the dog. Still one of my biggest regrets. Sorry, Silas. You were a good boy. Edit. If I had to give one piece of advice, it would be to be honest with your family and friends. Though that does seem impossible when you're convinced that if you tell anyone, they will know that you know. Story 87. One night heard a bunch of shuffling of boxes and someone shouting, "Where is he?" And I was alone at my house. Went downhill after that day. 5 years later, I hear and see what looks like Jesus in dreams, and with voices trying to get me to be a prophet. I'm just trying to wake up on time for work, okay? Story 88. Just a heads up, as I'm sure this was unintentional, but try to avoid using the term schizophrenic. These are people with schizophrenia, and they are so much more than their diagnosis. I know it might seem small, but I work in psychiatry and our words matter. Story 89. The exact reason I don't read threads like this is because I'm a bit of a hypochondriac. I always read this stuff and think, I've got this illness or that illness. Usually it's bullshit and placebo. Usually. Story 90. My symptoms started really young. I started hearing voices and seeing figures in my bedroom at night. My family would always tell me that I had an ability to hear and see the dead, and anytime I mentioned it, someone would talk about a related death and just fed into it. It got past that point, and I started getting these messed up blips that seemed so real and only lasted a second or a few. Glitches turning into perfect faces in my consoles and TV screens, getting crashed into by a semi going the wrong way, but it wasn't really happening. I always thought I was seeing the future, and it took experimenting with different medications to realize that it was all truly in my head. I wasn't allowed to go to therapy or anything as a kid, so I never fully came to terms with it until just a few years ago, and I'm 23. Some believers, including family, still try to convince me that I'm just psychic, and while I don't yell at anybody about it, I don't appreciate it one bit. Story 91. If you're a parent of someone who could have this if your other parent had it, please don't spy on your kid like my mom did to me. I already knew I had a higher chance of getting it, but hearing someone behind a door or on a stairway that just stops and listens is creepy, and a few times I thought I was just being paranoid until I caught my mom there one night when I was online with my friends playing an MMO, chatting with them. I didn't end up having any issues, although I have other mental health issues. I'm glad that's not the devil I know. Story 92. Not schizophrenic, but my mother is. When my grandparents noticed the break was when she started acting on it more. They had known for a while, from about age 18 to 19. She started bringing up past events and saying things happened different from how they actually went. Then the hallucinations got worse, paranoia set in, and she started acting in them. They would wake up in the night to find her gone, wandering the road trying to turn herself into the FBI for something that never happened, have to stop her from jumping out of the car on the highway because she was told they were taking her away, stuff like that. It was rough. Story 93. I'm not schizophrenic, but my brother is, and I once asked him how he knew something was wrong. He told me that he believed God was talking to him. He had a voice in his head talking to him, telling him what to do. He started letting the voice make decisions for him, and that ended up leading him to being jobless and practically homeless. My dad actually took him to a mental hospital for a few weeks where he was diagnosed and treated. He's doing great now. Story 94. My parents often asked who I was talking to so much. It went way beyond imaginary friend level. My mother once had to calm me down because one of them was angry and made me cry. That was the point where everyone kinda knew I had a leak in the brain pan. Story 95. Parent of a schizophrenic. We missed the warning signs big time, which in retrospect seem crystal clear. Abrupt change in personality. Went from open, incredibly friendly happy, to reserved antisocial, never rarely wanted to be around friends suspicious. Began pacing a lot, at all hours of the day. After a while, she began talking to herself while pacing. When she talked to herself, it sounded like she was on a Bluetooth. It was an actual conversation, not just thinking out loud. Hostility that came seemingly out of nowhere. Very cruel, mean-spirited comments. Total disorganization. Would lose items within minutes of obtaining them. Impossible to keep track of a phone. House key. Things most people can keep track of. Stopped combing her hair, brushing her teeth, or bathing. Went from a heavy sleeper to hardly sleeping at all. Her notes in school went from neat, legible, written in straight lines, to illegible, nonsensical, written in weird upward and downward slopes, bizarre doodles interspersed, and strange phrases that had nothing to do with class. She kept drawing the same picture thousands of times, over and over. You could see this in her school notes too. Since this all happened around adolescence, we chalked it up to being a moody teenager until it was painfully clear she was off her rocker. She ended up in a psych unit for a very long time. She is doing very well today on clorazaril, is in college and working part-time, and all in all, a beautiful young woman. Story 96. I might be completely wrong, but this thread is making question myself a lot. Edit. Since I don't want to hijack the thread, anyone know a subreddit where I could ask freely about some of my experiences that could be potentially related? Story 97. The major sign to me, in hindsight, was this pattern 1. Something would happen. Any stimuli. 2. To explain or describe that thing happening, there would be a minimum of 2 explanations, or at least 2 poles on a spectrum of decisions. Rationale 1 would be outlandish and bizarre, and the other innocuous and simple. 3. The simple one would be shunned as being too obvious and what they want me to think to cover up the bizarre one. 4. The bizarre one would then be formed as my memory of exactly what happened, and that decision-making process basically never existed. Example 1. There is a knocking sound in the wall. 2. It is nearing winter, so the heat is turning on, and the pipes are creaking, versus the psychic warfare agents are intentionally disturbing me, just letting me know that they exist without revealing themselves. 3. Sure, some of the sounds were the pipes creaking, maybe even the vast majority of them. But that's the perfect cover for the intentional attack on me. 4. I know that the agents are real, that we're in a psychic war, and they are actively suppressing my ability to reveal it by conflating what I'm experiencing with a mental illness. And so, if I ignore the nervous but completely natural and correct feeling response to the stimuli, I am losing the psychic war. So I must remain vigilant and not suppress my perceptions of these stimuli. Though people claim there are rational explanations for these things and proof, I can't know the difference, and without 100 observation, there is no separation between these attacks and non-attacks. Story 98. I was diagnosed with schizophrenia, but I doubt I have it, and I think I maybe just had a psychosis. I started eating less, sleeping less, and isolating myself by staying home and dropping out of school. I thought that people on the streets were making fun of me and that my friends were talking behind my back. I became depressed and suicidal, and I was obsessing over a few things that were occupying my mind and that were delusional. I was afraid of going out in the sun because I thought I had a serious disease that would ruin my face and skin if I went out. I thought that my eyes were getting smaller, that my lips were deformed by the sun, and that my face had wrinkles. Later, I thought that my face was legitimately shrinking and that the antipsychotic medicine they wanted to give me only would make it worse. Story 99. I'm not schizo, but thought I might have been in the past. but I went to therapy, was informed that I was just dealing with anxiety, possibly depression that was situational. Learned some things. I used to deal with paranoia and thought certain people were against me. Turned out to be true, and they were with me crazy making. Story 100. Not me, but my uncle. My mom's brother was majoring in engineering at a major university. It was in the late 60s, early 70s. He was experimenting with drugs, though they don't know the full extent or which may have come first. He was ultimately diagnosed as paranoid schizophrenic. My grandparents took him to doctors and got him as much help as they could. At one point, my grandmother went to S doctor, who prescribed her Valium or the equivalent, and said to not worry about it, there was nothing she could do for him. After about 2 days of being on Valium to cope, she threw them away and took action. She read every book she could get her hands on, started a local chapter of the Alliance for the Mentally Ill, a support group for families and patients. She got in contact with state senators and pushed for reform. She actually won the Volunteer of the Year in her state. The biggest incident my mom describes was when she was living out of state, about 10 hours away, and received a call from her brother. He told her he had killed their parents because they were aliens, and he put them in the attic. She insisted he tell her what was really going on. He kept explaining the alien theory. She hung up and called the local police in their hometown. They were already aware of the situation. The next call she received was her father acting like everything was fine. They had him committed that day. He had a habit of listening to the static on the radio or laughing in a quiet room. He also had instances of seemingly random violence. He once calmly got out of the car, approached a motorcycle in front of him, removed the rider's helmet, and punched him in the face. He was arrested. That was unusual, though. He lived off and on in group homes and institutions. They always fought to get him the best care. He passed away in 1990 of a heart condition that they believed to be caused by the medications. It broke my grandparents' hearts, but they continued to fight for education and funding for mental health programs. When I was really young, my grandmother had a phone in her office that I was told never to touch. It was a crisis hotline, and she was a volunteer that would help talk patients down or provide resources to families. She kept that phone going through her mid-80s. It was a terrible thing, but a lot of good came from it. My grandmother also changed political parties in the midst of it after realizing which side was actually willing to work to help the cause. Story 101. Schizophrenics of Reddit. My brother has been diagnosed with schizophrenia, but he refuses to take medication. We all love him, and we hate seeing him suffer. Was there anything your friends and family did to help you decide medication was worth a shot? Anything outside of that helped you decide to get treatment? Edit Uogist. Thanks for the feedback. I should clarify a couple things. First, I shouldn't have said just medication. He refuses any sort of psychological treatment as well. He has been almost completely socially withdrawn for 5 years. He's been cloistered in his room for the last 3, and is often catatonic. When he is not catatonic, he will have episodes that involve pained, angered yelling at things that aren't there, imaginary confrontational conversations with both real and not real people, and the occasional uncontrollable laughing fit. We get to see our old brother, the one that's happy, laughing, playful, and loving a few weeks out of the year, spread out across the year. We're on the same page as far as approaching medication with care, and my family has enough experience with mental health problems to know that it should always be paired with therapy. But he doesn't have a quality of life to diminish right now, and at this point, it seems like the only way to get him to go to therapy would be to kickstart the process with meds. Know what I mean? Also, from what I've read and heard, the newer injectable forms of the medications have a much better outlook compared to their oral counterparts. But I'm rambling. If anyone has any insight into even getting a schizophrenic family member to accept therapy alone, that would be great. Story 102. The shadow people out of the corner of my eye are the most common indicator. The brief flashes of insects crawling out tables, chairs, mousepads, etc. usually mean I'm stressed. On my worst days, I will be utterly convinced of something completely and utterly ridiculous, ready to jump off the balcony because Heratak, the alien tree spirit, is going to help me break through to the real world. Since I've been doing this a long time, I have a series of mental double checks that I use in conversations with people to keep myself in check. Wife and family, I can simply ask if I've been acting weird. Coworkers, I use something innocuous, like did we have a conversation about some mundane thing that happened loosely around the time I think I might have had an incident? Or did I remember to send you that thing? And I can chalk it up to being a bit forgetful. When really, I remember almost everything. It's just maybe 8 to 15 of things I remember maybe didn't actually happen, like having entire conversations or entire days play out. A few tips. Some drugs are great for helping you calm down, mitigate symptoms, and stay grounded in reality. I'll go through a pack of smokes a day, easily, and I will never be able to stop. More than a few will just straight up you over. Like marijuana, I used to love smoking up, but if I don't have the exact right strain at the exact right dosage, I will go into a tailspin, simply because I can't focus. If I can't make sure what's happening is really happening, then I am. Drinking kinda helps, as long as you don't drink to excess. Drinking lets you feel empowered enough to talk about what's going on in your head, but aware enough to cover it by saying something like, "All right, I got this neat story idea," and then people just think you're creative. Totems are extremely useful. I've personally got about 100 or so in the different places I go to gauge whether I am really there. A coworker's picture on their wall, a certain nick on a door frame, icons on your computer taskbar, etc. The thing is, yes, these are all subject to change, but that's the point. If one of them does change, I make a note of it, verify my world is real, and if it is, then I change the totem. If I picked a semi-permanent object, then I could easily incorporate that object into a delusion, which makes it useless. The process of totems also makes me hyper-observant. It's a backwards way of setting up a mind palace. So I'll notice patterns or changes where no one else would. That's extremely useful for a number of different professions, provided you're not customer-facing. I've got 3 people I trust enough to make the call. That is, if I get bad, they're directed to, in this order: 1, remove me from the situation and calm me down. If that doesn't work, or I'm violent, 2, get me into a place that can handle me and do the 72-hour psych hold. And finally, if I'm hurting people and cannot be brought down, 3, put a bullet in me. I trust these 3 people more than anything, literally, more than reality, because I have to. Get plenty of sleep every night, even if it means missing out. Sleep is the most important things of keeping me grounded. I know this because if I don't sleep one night, I won't sleep the next, and so on. And it only take about 20-ish hours before the conspiracy theories start boiling in my brain, and I won't let myself sleep. About the 48-hour mark, I have superpowers, and the governments of the world are trying to lull me into a safe space to harvest my brain. And at the 60-hour mark, I have ascended into my quasi-final form, where I no longer hear speech because I can read your mind and I levitate everywhere, because I've learned how I don't have to walk. Eat better. I mean, do this even if you don't have a neurochemical disorder. But all too often, I, and the people around me, are subject to all too much mental bullshittery to be taxed with cooking a good meal. McDonald's is cheap, and it always tastes like McDonald's. It's comforting, but it's also destroying my gut, making me fatter and destroying what proper neural pathways I actually have left. So eat better, literally whenever you can. Use it. This one, maybe wishful thinking. But the best people who have ever lived have been a bit crazy. Find a way to let it out a little. Story 103. How would I warn OTagers? Do not do marijuana, I repeat. Do not do marijuana, not for us. This beloved drug ramps up the rate of going mad, like you wouldn't believe. There is a lot of evidence for this now, and from scouring the forums I have found this to be true too. If you have family history, then absolutely do not touch it. I don't know how I can convince someone over the internet, but psychosis and hallucinations for the rest of your life isn't worth it. Story 104. Well, my brother has been diagnosed with schizophrenia. He's 2 years older than me. I'm 28. When he was 17, his friends drove him to a haunted location and as a prank, abandoned him there. He came back, but was never the same again. He then started watching a lot of religious channels, where Indians and Hindu. He'd watch it non-stop, day in, day out, and tell us that a goddess visits him at nights and speaks to him. One day while watching TV, he suddenly stopped talking, eyes wide open, looking at the TV, but not responding to our words or even us pulling his hands. He was then diagnosed with schizophrenia. In the weeks and months that followed, things would be normal, and then out of nowhere, he'd look at us and ask who we were. He said he couldn't recognize us and thought we're there to cause him damage. He'd then immediately snap back and say, he's sorry, he didn't know what got into him. It's been more than a decade. Things are not the same, but almost the same. Story 105. I've said this before in a similar thread, but I have a buddy who said that his worst experience was car license plates talking to him while driving and insulting him. He's doing better now. Story 106. Funny, I have an appointment today with my doc about this. I have schizoaffective disorder. First signs I remember was thinking I could hear people's thoughts, getting mad at people for things I perceived them to say or do, arranging things in a complicated Rube Goldberg bullshittery and assigning meaning to it, manic behavior, highs and lows of pure sadness, or hyper-focused and not sleeping. Those were the first things that got the attention of my parents and teachers. Parents missed it as my mother has similar signs. In all honest response, it was a lot of little things. Best way I can put it is, take acid minus the loss of ego. It manifests mostly now as hearing people talking or singing, sometimes music, doors opening and closing, windows shutting, and wisps of figures just off to the side. Bugs landing on me. Lot of stuff that I can control to some degree with meds and techniques. I wouldn't warn people, just advise them to see a mental health professional if they ever feel like something is going on. And to be real honest, it is so common for people to lie in sessions. Story 107. Simeone I know well. The first signs were getting into conspiracy theories. At first, he was only semi-interested, but then it became an obsession. After a year, my friend was 100% certain the world was going to end on a specific date which already passed, that anyone working for government is a lizard, that the FBI is watching him at all times, and that aliens and saucer-type UFOs visit Earth daily. It's all he ever talked about and thought about. Few years later, he began developing all schizophrenic symptoms, visual auditory hallucinations, etc. Has to be on very strong meds to be even a bit sane. If you guys ever wonder how certain conspiracy theories have such a big following, keep in mind 1 to 3 of the world's population is schizophrenic. The main and first symptom is almost always paranoia, which is how they take belief in things like that. Story 108. My aunt and my uncle have schizophrenia. Well, had. My aunt has since passed. She was unfortunately put through electroshock therapy as a teenager, and it ruined her life. She was a zombie and a shell of a person after that, and medication. Poor lady, I love her and miss her. My uncle, on the other hand, started using drugs after he got visual hallucinations in high school. That only made it worse, and he became homeless and no one knew where he was. He was on and off drugs at his worst and would wander through the streets. He showed up at our front door one day in a state across the country from where we thought he was living. I was 10, and he asked my mom if he could take me down to the freeway and look at the patterns in the trash. He believed that aliens were talking to him through that as he cleaned it up, but that an innocent child would make them more willing to talk. My mom said no, and he got violent. He got angry, and my dad had to kick him out and threw money at him to get him to leave. He was eventually admitted and got help, and he is doing better. I know he also used to think he was Jesus reincarnated. He is a genius, though, for real. He is a writer, musician, and talented artist, does murals for the city. Story 109, diagnosed schizophrenic bipolar myself. I started by hearing the voices of dead relatives. They were the most comforting voices I had ever heard. Not that I was hearing them, I was supposedly hallucinating. They were always within my head, never out loud like normal people talked, so I could chatter away to them in my thoughts. This happened over a matter of months. It got to the point where my dead relatives had morphed into other living people's voices. Most of the time positive, but sometimes negative voices. It got to the point where all I heard was the negatives, typical stuff, people out to get me. It got hard as I was admitted to hospital, but I'll go on about that below. The second sign was I stopped making sense. I couldn't communicate my thoughts to real people, only the ones inside my head. I would begin sentences in the middle of them and look weirdly at people when they asked what I was on about. I was completely confused as to why everyone was constantly asking me if I was all right. In truth, I was. I wasn't going to harm anyone. I just wanted to share my theories on the world. Whether they were a long shot or not, I just wanted to share. Third sign I was schizophrenic was the fact that I started seeing pictures in the shadows and laughing at them. They were humorous. Unfortunately, I don't remember much about this state of mind I was in because I was severely sick by this point. Hospital was hard work. There were a mix of different personalities and diagnosis, so I felt really on edge the whole time. It was a terrible environment to be in during a severe state of mind. I remember two guys kicking a beanbag around, and I couldn't watch because all I thought was they're kicking it because they're pretending it's me. I could go on for pages and pages about what I talked about to myself, and I have a collection of notes about what I was talking about somewhere at home. If anyone is interested, I will edit this comment with more info. Story 110. Just like to add, for anyone browsing the thread, schizophrenics are far more likely to be the victim of violent crimes than the general population. They have more to fear from other people than we do from them. Don't fear these people for a mental illness they can't change. It only makes it worse for them to be cast out and treated like they're lunatics. Story 111. This seems like a way to out people. I don't think reality is broken. I just think we all got misguided. Betrayal, fate, is in scent that guides a person to calm down over any chemical. Any chemical. And by I mean that, the reactions of the regiment of the cell and neuron structures strike panic. I guess it's the only way to really deal with experience. I don't know what broken reality is, because to many of the people around me, the sounds, the movements, are bitterly ignored or ignored. You decide. Just don't freak out if you can't control your thoughts. They can seem fanatical, but remember that there are proper ways of teaching the body to deal with what could most likely end up being superstition, regardless of how mentally you feel it. Just be strong. Story 112. I rallied a few friends of mine, plus my brother, to go to a concert. It's a 5-hour drive, and we take 2 cars. We're pretty die-hard fans, so we get there like 10 hours before the show starts and are first in line. My brother has battled depression, anxiety, and suicidal thoughts his entire life. After an entire day of standing in line with not enough food water, it's about 30 minutes until doors open and there's hundreds of people lined up behind us. My brother is quiet and looking at the ground, being his normal, anxious, insecure self that I'm used to. Fast forward 30 minutes, doors open. We go in and get right up front. After a minute or two, my brother pulls me aside. He tells me there's people here to kill him. They have knives and they're going to stab him to death. For the first time in my life, I hear the voice and see the face of a man who believes he's going to die any second. We went outside where he continued to tell me we have to leave or he's going to die. It's really hitting me now that he needs to go. I let everyone else know he's having a breakdown, and we leave. On the ride home, he settles down a little, and we talk about life. He explains that he's been experiencing paranoia for years, believing there's people who are after him. He said what triggered him today was this homeless man who stopped and talked with us several times throughout the day as he passed by the area. Also down the road, we learned nicotine is a big trigger for paranoia with him, and he was smoking like a chimney all day with little to eat. Anyways, I get my brother to the hospital in our local area. We wait around until 4 a.m. He gets admitted to the psych ward, and after a couple weeks, he balances out. My friends caught a drumstick and gave it to me. Clutch. Story 113. This thread has not been good for my moderate OCD, which causes me to think I have health problems. But I'm so glad for the people who have gotten treatment and are doing better. Story 114. Mundane things started to have strange significance. I'd look at street signs, billboards, etc., and think the universe was sending me secret messages. I also started feeling like everyone was watching, talking about me. Story 115. I have schizoaffective disorder. My early signs were thinking people were out to get me on all aspects of life, basically wanted to take away what little I had, and that I had a spout of multiple personality issues, but I later overcame that as the 2 others in my head were just me. I was so alone in life. I split myself into 3, so I could have friends to talk to. Story 116. I had a girlfriend who got diagnosed in college. Within 1 week, she had gone from her regular state to complete paranoid schizophrenic. Full-on visual hallucinations, audio hallucinations, suddenly super religious, was agnostic beforehand, basically ruined her life very quickly. I think she has a good regimen now and keeps it under control. My brother-in-law is also a paranoid schizophrenic and has basically the opposite luck. He thought the stars were telling him to kill himself, and he's been on and off the streets ever since. Story 117. Not schizo, but diagnosed BPD. But thinking I was the Truman Show. Thinking coworkers were putting drugs in my coffee and food, also weight gainer. Thinking songs and TV were speaking to me and pertained to my life. Unhappy coincidences in life all around me. I'm not sure if my BPD diagnosis is correct. I act irrational sometimes, but I've learned to manage. The paranoid thoughts and delusions are sometimes still there. It's all very confusing sometimes, but as long as I stay grounded and meditate and use mindfulness exercises, I'm usually all right. Like in the back of my head, I know these delusions are wrong, but what if they're not? Story 118. I'm not sure how visible this comment will be, but I'm not a schizophrenic. My brother is. My brother killed our mother because of his illness. Schizophrenia is no joke. He started hearing voices when he was around 20. He was also heavy into drugs at that time, including spice and bath salts. So when he would complain of voices or hallucinating, my parents would chalk it up to his drug use. Big mistake. What I'm saying is, if you're being spoken to by a person or people in your head, please get checked out. Don't try to justify it and rationalize it. Schizophrenia manifests around 19 to 22, so be informed. Story 119. So I'm really late to this post, and I don't know if I have schizophrenia. I do have BPD, but I've been having a lot of symptoms, so might as well post. So I've heard things and seen things for a pretty long time, probably about 12 to 13 years old. I say seen because I've never actually looked directly at a hallucination. It's always been in the corner of my vision. It's never really been an issue and has happened so infrequently that it was never really worth addressing in any way since it wasn't impacting my life at all. However, over the past month or so, the hallucinations have been getting far worse. To list out some things that have been happening. Hearing voices call my name in my house. I've been home by myself a lot, so this has kind of added to the creepiness. These voices will come from different spots of my house without any real pattern. Mostly they come from my basement, which I have refused to go down for the past 2 weeks. Hearing screams or crying from another part of the house. This one is infrequent but terrifying when it does happen. I have to look at people around me to tell if it's real or not. One time, it sounded like my youngest sister and I spent about 3 hours tearing my house apart looking for her. Seeing shadows in the corner of my vision that disappear when I look directly at them. I call them shades, and they like to hang out in the corners of rooms or the back seat of my car. Sometimes they have eyes that are like little white dots. This probably sounds terrifying, and they were at first, but they're almost comforting now. Saw the moon appear in front of me low to the horizon while I was driving. It was absolutely gigantic and full and glowing a strange red. It passed behind some trees, and I couldn't find it again. I know it was a hallucination because we should have had a half moon, and also it was cloudy. A voice crying under my bed at about 2 a.m. Hearing people talk to each other about me in the next room. Usually this is family or friends. Having delusions that everyone around me is talking about me in a very negative way. Woke up and actually had like a little bit of a conversation with one voice who sounded like a teacher I once had. Once I realized there was no way I should be talking to this person and snapped awake, the voice started laughing at me maniacally. All of this has been over the past month and has been getting more and more constant. I've actually named a few of the voices that are consistent. Story 120. I'm impressed with the level of insight these answers reflect. Not insight in the sense of depth of understanding about something generally, but insight in the clinical sense, self-awareness about the fact of your disorder and its symptoms. Somewhere along the way, I got the idea that people with schizophrenia are unusually resistant to insight, that they view themselves as having extraordinary talents for perception, which are gifts to be embraced, not burdens to be rid of. But maybe this idea was just a projection on my part. As a person who struggled with substance use disorder and OCD for most of his life, I have found insight to be the hardest part in my own recovery. Was I getting wasted as a rational response to distressing thoughts and feelings? Was I getting wasted because it was the only way I could have fun anymore? The idea that getting wasted was a habituated compulsive behavior wasn't exactly right at my fingertips. It seemed normal and made sense, even if it caused a lot of pain as well. Even harder to pathologize when most of your family and friends are doing similar stuff. And nearly a decade later, I still struggle with acceptance of the OCD diagnosis. I mean, one of my themes is fear of being a latent schizophrenic, and the only reason I'm creeping in these comments is because I'm compulsively seeking reassurance. Yes, I can see it now, on the back end, but when I saw the post in my feed, the compulsion grasped me to click and scroll, and it was because I need to know whether I truly do or do not have this devastating illness that I'm almost completely certain I secretly have even though everybody says I don't. Haha. Yeah. Insight. Story 121 late answer. But first signs for me are always very basic hallucinations. Was that a fly? Was that a moth? I think a spider just ran under the TV. Hope this helps. Story 122. To those here mentioning the shadow people they see, as it has been mentioned a few times. I know it must be difficult, but could you please try to describe what you are seeing? I think hearing what different people's interpretations of this are would be very enlightening for myself and others, only if it's not too unpleasant. Thanking you kindly in advance. Story 123. Not me, but my brother. Looking back, it was a downward spiral. He started drinking heavily, had 2 DUIs and always seemed to be drunk. We thought he just had a drinking problem. He later told us he was so freaked out about hearing voices and that drinking made him tolerate it more. Story 124. It depends if it's one episode psychosis or psychosis that develops into bipolar, schizoaffective, or schizophrenia. Bipolar and schizoaffective you recover quite well on medication. Schizophrenia people tend to get worse and worse over time. If it's a one-off, the psychosis can come and go on its own to never come back. You may need some medication to pull you out, and it never comes back. Some people develop psychosis at a flip of a switch, such as if a predisposed person's trigger is pot and they smoke pot. Some people even become psychotic from long flights where the time change is significant enough to miss out on a night's sleep. With psychotic depression, basically, you are depressed for so long your mind just breaks. So it's hard to tell personally when you become psychotic. You can't tell early warning signs yourself unless you see them in another person. Delusions, hallucinations. There are many categories of delusions. Perspicuity delusions are the worst for upping the likelihood of suicide because the person feels like the government or everyone is plotting against them. Also, many different types of hallucination, visual seeing things that are not there. Audio is the most common hearing voices that are not there, can be someone talking to you, about you, narrating your actions, or even two people having a conversation together. There is tactile, where the sufferer feels physical sensations that aren't there. The rarest hallucination is sense of smell, smelling things that aren't there, and is typically an indicator of brain tumor or other neurological condition, not psychosis. Should seek medical advice of a psychiatrist who specializes in psychosis and psychotic disorders. Story 125. I used to have the worst paranoia. Every person I passed was talking about me. I was positive, even players in online games, not the NPCs. There was a run of new license plates at the time, starting in DR, like DR8253, and I was so sure they were mocking me because I wanted to go to nursing school but couldn't for reasons. I have occasional auditory and audio hallucinations that I'm aware of, but I got put on meds for depression and made some major life changes, and that all sort of faded. Ended up on antipsychotics lithium because it's the one that gives me the least side effects. Haven't been diagnosed, but again, that all faded. Could have just been severe depression anxiety, and I can't seek a DX based on SXS from 15 years ago. This thread has me questioning, however. Story 126. Sorry to be slightly off topic, but I heard secondhand of a lady with schizophrenia who used her dog as a reality check. Her particular hallucination was that blood would be pouring down her walls. A dog, obviously, would be very interested in blood because of the smell. So when she'd see blood pouring down the walls, she'd look at her dog. If the dog wasn't reacting to the blood wasn't real, and she could ignore it and keep on doing whatever she'd been doing before. Story 127. My father was a schizophrenic who believed he was Jesus Christ. He would talk to God every day and even took a vow or silence for 4 months. In the end, he believed he had to sacrifice himself so that the other humans may live. He ended up hanging himself. If you catch it early on, you should definitely seek help. He knew he was mentally ill, but he thought he could control it. And he did for about 37-ish years, and then out of nowhere he lost control and was completely consumed by his delusions. He was so out of it that he would preach to me about how I need be a good human and stop eating meat and pray all the time. Sorry if this is everywhere I was sad writing it, but I just don't want everyone to have to experience that crazy. Get help. I'm pretty sure schizophrenia is passed down, right? Do I have anything to worry about? Story 128. My mom was schizoaffective with a side case of epilepsy, which took a really long time to properly diagnose. In general, the bipolar aspects were really easy to pinpoint and manifested pretty normally, which hid the schizophrenic aspects until they were full-blown Newt Gingrich is on the lawn trying to get my lawn, so I have to kill myself. Episodes, well, the complex disorder inadequate mental health care that should have caught it a lot earlier. Looking back on it, there were a lot of subtle and not so subtle clues that something wasn't quite right. One, she thought she was the goddess Isis Nefertiti reincarnated. She believed in reincarnation, so this was in line with her religious beliefs. But looking back on it, it was probably one of the earliest symptoms too. She once tried to poison all of us kids with arsenic. She was going to mix it in with a big batch of Kool-Aid and serve it with potato soup, if I remember her plan correctly. Her reasoning was that the world was a terrible place and she felt bad for bringing us into it. This was a not-so-subtle clue that something wasn't right, but we were too young to realize the horror and the danger of the situation, and my stepfather was a lord. 3. Various other subtle auditory and visual hallucinations that were easy enough to write off and explain away. It wasn't until much, much later when the hallucinations were of the holy, "What is going on right now?" variety that the doctors paid any attention to them as being a serious symptom that changed the diagnosis. Once she got competent mental help, it was too little, too late. Things were on an upswing for a while as they started dialing in medications, and then they went downhill and the story ends like just about every other schizoaffective patient story. It didn't have to, necessarily, but she didn't get the help she needed until it was way too late, and her support structure was not great. It literally is a coin toss if a schizophrenic has any insight ever into their onset of symptoms. More often than not, after being properly medicated, the person won't remember much. My sister is an adult-onset schizophrenic. I am her primary caretaker. She's been mostly properly medicated for the last 8 years. Thank God. Before that, she was in living on and off medication, in and out of living on the streets for 15 years. She was in her early 20s when she had her first psychotic break. I can tell you from the outside, it was two things. One, the belief that you're being watched, followed, spied on, talked about. Usually those beliefs are voiced too. The obsession with something in the self, for example for my sister, she begins to feel the need to cover herself up because something is wrong with her hair or her skin. If she starts wearing hats and sunglasses, we're on a downward slope. She reports feeling like her skin is an odd color, too blue, if she's capable of expressing what feels wrong. I understand this issue with the self is something that happens more with women than with men. It's a shitty disease, one of the worst mental illnesses a person could ever be cursed to have to deal with. How I would warn others? Boy, I have years and years and years of experience with this, and the only warning I can give is to a caring family member. Act fast, get them to a mental health provider immediately. And come on strong, insist, they go and don't stop insisting. Drag them kicking and screaming if necessary. Call a crisis intervention center or the police if that's what you need to do to get them help. It's better to overreact than under because you might be wrong or might hurt someone's feelings. Push until they accept help or will no longer speak to you. If they stop speaking to you, then push some more. Never give up. Story 129. My father is schizophrenic. He refuses treatment but has accepted he is a bit cuckoo. He's a very smart man, so it's really interesting being around him. Our first signs, he had something going on. Quit his job, friends, started retreating and being alone. He also neglected his hygiene. Stopped cutting his hair or wearing anything besides PJs or track pants. More signs that followed. Finding writing on the computer, in smoke packs, on scrap papers. Weird sentences or reminders that made no proper sense to anyone but him. Constantly drawn to TV, radio, talking to himself and kinda needing to be snapped back into reality to get his attention. Paranoia of neighbors' cops' aircraft. We lived beside a hospital and helicopters would land for patients to be transported. The government was watching him. Finally, the last straw until diagnosis was a complete mental break. His psychosis was scary, like a movie. I can't describe how eerie it was. He thought himself Lucifer, and I was a deity. Everyone else was red-faced people who were out to get him. Got crazy real fast, but we got him help, and that was 5 years ago now. I hope any of these signs help someone who might have a family member friend showing some signs. This post has actually got me thinking if I should check in with a therapist and discuss these things. Story 130. Thought I was, for some time, but it turned out it was anxiety-induced paranoia. My advice is to know the difference between paranoiac and paranoid. Ask yourself, is there any way someone can prove to me that this isn't real? If no, it might be paranoia. If yes, and you still believe it, you might be paranoid. For example, nobody can prove to me without a doubt that my neighbor isn't stalking me. But if actors or audience or laughing at you in the TV, it's quite different. Do you isolate yourself? Do you stop to wash, take care of yourself? Is there an augmentation of your drug consumption? Do you feel threatened all the time? Do you have bizarre and illogical ideas and thoughts? Hallucinations can occur, but not always. If you feel paranoid and have any of these symptoms, the best thing to do is to see a psychiatrist ASAP. Remember, being schizophrenic is not the end of your life. Many schizophrenics have plain and functional life. Contrary to the belief, hallucinations and delusions are not the most painful symptoms. The isolation-induced depression symptoms are often the most problematic and can be treated. Your life is as precious as any other life on Earth. Story 131. Sorry for my English, not my first language. That's a very interesting and important topic to help other people. I have lost 2 friends that committed suicide because of it. I felt very, very sad for them because I saw that even their families didn't understand, comprehend them, or dealt the disorder as a real problem. Story 132 man. Reading all of these comments has given me a new level of respect for the movie A Beautiful Mind. I thought it was exaggerating things for cinematic effect, but it sounds like it was actually a good depiction of schizophrenia. Story 133. I have a friend who has schizoaffective disorder and thought a man was following her and trying to kill her. I have another friend who had psychotic depression and thought that the comic Homestuck was trying to give her messages about some big plot. She thought all her family and friends were in on it. It was sad to see her cut out so many friends who cared about her, to hear her start to become suspicious of her family members, and to fear that she would eventually think I was in on the plot and stop talking to me as well. She finally got sent to the hospital when she showed up to class completely covered in body paint from head to toe. She had written, "I want to die" on her legs and stuff. Saddest part is a lot of the friends she pushed away in her psychosis never reached back out to her or really tried that hard to hold on when she pushed them away. Story 134. My mom is schizophrenic. Growing up, I didn't realize she wasn't normal. Then one day I came to the realization that she was sick. She is extremely paranoid about everything, so much so that she hasn't left the house for over a year now. She has episodes where she thinks she is being gassed and will scream and bang on the walls. This used to happen once a year, then started to happen once a month, then once a week, now happens about once every hour, even through the night. She isn't aware that it's not really happening. She doesn't think she is sick and is completely convinced that it is reality and thinks we are crazy not to be seeing what she sees. Story 135. I have all the trappings of schizophrenia except for the most glaring symptoms like regularly occurring hallucinations. The categories constantly shift, but I would have been listed as having disorganized schizophrenia a few years ago. This made it difficult to come to an accurate understanding of my condition, as I always ascribed my deteriorating cognitive and mental faculties to personal failings. I gradually lost my capacity to function in social groups, plan out time and resources, or read and write coherently. When I look back on journals from the absolute worst it got, it's complete nonsense. There's trails of thought winding towards what I thought were profound, almost savant-like revelations at the time, but were pure gibberish. Over time, this evolved into more and more blatant delusions of grandeur. I thought I could just pick up an instrument and become a master in days. I recorded videos of myself playing guitar and piano and sent them to people to show how good I was. When my condition fully deteriorated, those delusions became ones of persecution and conspiracy. I thought people wanted what was inside my head and would trap me to extract it. Social anxiety turned into full-on agoraphobia, and I wouldn't leave my room in my apartment. Wouldn't recommend it. Story 136. Not schizophrenic, but I feel like the time in primary school I had a panic attack because I thought my lunch was poisoned. Probably should have been a tip-off that I didn't have the best mental health. My DX is social anxiety, so I don't really know where the delusions come from. Mostly I'm just convinced I have cancer. There was that time I thought I had bugs in my head, and that one bit of pavement I can't stand on because it's a portal to another dimension. Fun times. Story 137. I heard voices in my head for a long time, but I didn't realize that that was unusual until one day when I mentioned it, and realized that other people don't regularly hear things like that. When I was about 15 or 16, I started having catatonic episodes where I couldn't speak and was sometimes completely unresponsive, and other episodes of a kind of word salad where I couldn't communicate properly. I thought they were all seizures at the time. Then I started having visual and tactile hallucinations, usually of snakes in my body or things like that. Apart from those symptoms which should have made it obvious I should get help, I didn't for a long time until I went to college. I also had delusions, believing in a secret group of people spying and plotting against me, and weird stuff like that. Just always feeling like there was special meaning in everything that happened, or sometimes thinking someone had been replaced with an evil duplicate of themselves. All these things eventually became very frequent until I was having episodes every day. At that point, I agreed to start taking medicine, even though I was very scared that the secret organization wanted me to take it so they could trick me into not knowing what's going on with them. But now I'm on meds and very rarely have episodes. Story 138. I'm a bit late to the party, but I figured I'd throw my story in here too. My father is currently dealing with what appears to be schizophrenia, though no one is 100% sure because he hasn't been diagnosed. It started a few years ago with him offering to help one of his friends dig up some information on her father, who worked as an undercover operative for the CIA. She gave him all of the documents she had relating to him, and he got to work. At first, everything seemed pretty legitimate. He pored over the documents, and with some digging online, he managed to piece together a good amount about the guy's past. As time went on, it became clear that it was becoming an obsession for him. He started showing me pictures of various things relating to the agent and insisting that there were hidden messages in them. For example, he'd see a pattern that vaguely resembled something like a letter and insist that it had some meaning behind it. Eventually, he thought the messages in the pictures were instructions on where to find buried gold in a nearby park and went to investigate. When he obviously didn't find the gold, he started to think that it was inside a bell at the top of a bell tower in the park and would have gone to get it, but he said he needed help to get to it, which no one offered. We were evicted from his apartment, so I started living with my mom full-time while he stays in a hotel nearby. We found out that he believes that the messages in the pictures are addressed to him directly and are from the CIA. He believes that he's essentially been made an agent and was given government clearance. Recently, we spoke to him, and he told us that someone is stealing the 100-month payments he's making to a debt collection agency, and that talking with him about any of this with electronics nearby could be dangerous because someone could be listening through them. We've exhausted pretty much every option available to get him treatment given to us by the state Pennsylvania, and are very much at a loss for what to do. We've reached out to his therapist to inform him of how he's acting, but there's not really much he can do without my dad agreeing to an evaluation. He's technically not a danger to himself or others either, otherwise we would have 302D him. If anyone has any advice or options we can pursue, please let me know. Story 139. I'm so late to the party. But I have had auditory, visual, and tactile hallucinations since I was 12. The paranoia started at 13 or 14, the delusions at 16. I was originally diagnosed with bipolar, but I am not a diagnosed schizoaffective bipolar type with anxiety. I decided to get help when I almost got in a car wreck seeing a little girl in pajamas chasing a bear across the street. At the time, I was convinced I was in a coma because I heard people calling my name and telling me to wake up. And because I was so suicidal, I thought that was a sign that I had to kill myself to escape my coma and return to my real life. I was put on antipsychotics, and today I'm on 9 different medications, all trying to take care of different parts of my brain. No matter how many antipsychotics I'm on, no matter the dosages, I always see, hear, and feel things that don't exist. I've come to live with it. Story 140 lol. So after this, I definitely have mild schizophrenia. I remember at my lowest point, I would feel soul-crushing guilt while watching that 70s show because it felt like they were all directing their insults at me, criticizing my life. Story 141. Not schizophrenic, but I had psychosis induced by severe abuse. The first signs were me beginning to disassociate, and not just during the abuse. It would happen on the bus, for hours after the abuse, in class, when I was with my friends. It felt like I was surrounded by a big plastic bubble, and I was floating like a tiny thing inside my body, just watching everything happen. I felt like I wasn't really real. After that, I started hearing little scritch-type noises, and then voices talking to me. I started seeing things right in the corner of my vision. I felt that random unseen forces were plotting against me. Sometimes I had a break from reality that was so intense that I felt I would just black out. It was horrible. Whenever I was awake, I wanted to kill myself, or I had massive panic attacks during which I would hallucinate big black lurking things coming for me. I still can't watch horror movies because it's too real for me. Story 142 IDK if relevant, but very recently I've been getting blurry vision and things move, like imagine holding a pencil or any object and it wiggles left and right slightly. Story 143. I'm not schizophrenic, but I sometimes suffer audio or visual hallucinations when I'm extremely stressed. I recall being in my middle school locker room and opening the door of my locker, only to slam it shut because there was a huge yellow jacket wasp in there. Seeing as I was an outcast, I figured that I might have accidentally left my combination lock undone, and somebody had played a mean prank on me. The next time I had gym, I very cautiously opened the locker, only to find no trace of the wasp. I've also had instances where I hear someone calling my name. I've worked in places where I'd be the only person in the building for a couple hours. I once heard a male voice call my name when I was alone, which freaked me the out, to say the least. Story 144. Not schizophrenic, but I am concerned. Sometimes when listening to the radio, you'll hear completely different lyrics than what are being said, and then it'll just go back to normal after a few seconds. Sometimes I hear what sounds like people talking or random voices either when I'm at work or driving my car. There's been multiple times when I'm out doing something and everything feels like it's not real or that I'm not really there, and I get paranoid or feel like I'm having an anxiety attack. I've been diagnosed with major depression and general anxiety disorder, so I'm not sure if those have anything to do with it, but it just feels like I'm slowly losing my mind. Story 145. Not a schizophrenic, but I think it's worth putting out there that a schizophrenia diagnosis is not reliant on the presence of visual or auditory hallucinations. Schizophrenia is extremely disorganized thoughts accompanied by excessive neurotransmitter activity, typically those associated with dopamine. This often, maybe typically, results in hallucinations, but it always causes an inability to maintain a single train of thought for an extended period of time and can even be severe enough that the person isn't able to verbally express their thoughts with any coherence. Story 146. When I first started hearing voices, I thought they were people downstairs trying to talk to me in my dorm room. Then I heard them in the shower and started to think the world was talking through the voices. That's when everything went bad. After finding the perfect doses of medicine and some therapy, I have learned a lot and am doing better now. The voices don't fight me anymore, and they tell me they love me. Lowell. For a warning, I would see a mental health doctor, and I would say, do not entertain the voices or believe what they say. They are not real, and your mental health problem is messing with your mind. Don't do drugs or self-harm. It hurts, but hurting yourself won't make the pain go away. Find a doctor to give you medicine and a therapist to talk to. Mental health is an invisible thing people must take care of, and after being schizophrenic for 12 years now, I think I got it. Life seems better.